And you are live.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, July 15th, 7 p.m. Planning Commission meeting. I'm the chairman, Ben Sale, and we have all commissioners that are currently on the commission present. We did not have the July 1st meeting, so our last meeting was actually in June. So we will go ahead and look at the agenda. It should be displayed to everyone. Rolling down here to first order of business, item for order of business, call to order. Meetings in order, and also roll call, please, Tammy.
Mr. Sale,
Here.
Mr. Waldman,
Present.
Mr. Imes,
Here.
Miss Butler, Mr. Klein,
Present.
that's it.
And I thought we had Miss Butler. Evidently, we do not. Am I not seeing her here? There she is. Miss Butler, I didn't hear you on the roll call. Are you able to hear us fine? Bob Waldman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Miss Butler, can you hear me? Mr. Waldman can hear me. Diane Butler, we're not hearing you at the moment. Has anyone else heard her? Bob, have you been able to hear Diane?
I have not heard her.
Okay.
I thought, didn't Julian, weren't we talking to her earlier?
We were, yes.
Yeah, maybe she can leave it and come back, but I think it's just a glitch, probably.
And just make sure we didn't mute her from a meeting host perspective, please.
No,
Julian.
she's fully muted right now. That's on her end.
Okay. Diane, if you could please check in again, either raise your hand, text, or something, give us some kind of message to make us aware that you're able to communicate with us. We're going to proceed on with the minutes, at least get that going. Hopefully you can rejoin us over the next minute or so. Get rid of some of the admin minutia while we're waiting on you to check in. Okay. For the roll call, we have everyone present except for communications via voice with Diane, and hopefully she can dial back in a minute or two. The approval of minutes we have on our agenda showing July 1st draft, but our last meeting was actually in June. So it'd be the June minutes for the second meeting, not July 1st. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tammy, but since we didn't have a meeting earlier this July, there'll be no minutes at all, no record for that meeting, or do we actually have to have a placeholder minutes sheet for that?
No, it's been canceled on the website, and the last meeting was June 17th.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. I'm going to stop sharing the agenda. We'll move on to the June 17th minutes. I'll show those. Okay, hopefully you guys can see these and we'll go through them. And Diane did have a small modification for, but we'll go ahead and let you look through these and then I'll mention Diane's modification.
And Mr. Chair, just so you know, I just texted Diane. She's trying to reconnect right now.
Okay, Diane, were you able to get back in? We had a little reset there. No? Okay, I will mention her changes from her email. The only modification that Diane had was under approval of minutes. She wanted to make it abundantly clear that she continued to recuse herself on September 21st. I'm sorry, on 09/21 at this follow-on June 17th meeting as well. So a continual for recusal, which I think is good. And the approval of minutes, it would be right under section 1 on the June 3rd, 2021 minutes. Those that little item under there. And Tammy, I had no problem with that. Are you able to add that on as Diane included in the email?
Yes, I will add it to the June 17th, 2021 meeting minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no further changes for the meeting minutes. And that change from Diana, she requested the email today is all that I request. So on that note, we'll make a motion for approval of the minutes as amended.
So moved.
All right, so I made a motion. There was a second. Any discussion, further discussion? Not hearing any. All those for approval for, I'm sorry, all those in approval for the minutes as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any, okay, there we go.
I abstain since, I'm abstaining since I was not at
present.
the last meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr.
But I
Plon.
thoroughly enjoyed reading the minutes.
A riveting experience, I'm sure. All right,
Ben, are we gonna count Diane since she is not? How are we gonna do that?
I think it would have to be 3 out of 4 instead of 3 out of 5.
I say we can count her because she logged in. She sent me that email prior to the meeting and she's here at this meeting. If she doesn't
Okay.
show up for the rest of the meeting, I can understand that. But this is for the minutes, exact minutes she's already reviewed and requested her change, and there's no other amendment by anyone else to the minutes. So her vote would count for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we can move on to section D, public hearings. RNC 2021-12, the R2NC site design plan review application by Ronald and Holly Foster, 414 3rd Street. And this is the first time, so our public hearing will be continued to August 5th after it gets heard today with any public comment. So over to staff.
Okay, Julian, did you bring the applicants over?
Yes, we have Ronald Foster and then Stephen Gigliotti.
I think it's Gigliotti.
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Kevin Scott. I'm a senior planner with the Department of Planning and Zoning. This is a site design for the R2NC district, RNC 2021-012. It's a duplex structure that exceeds 3,250 square feet. Very similar to the 114 Chesapeake Avenue case that the commission heard back in May, except this is a joint application for both units. So it's the Fosters and the Tolles that are both doing additions to the back of their duplex units. And because it's over 3,250, the commission has to approve it or has to review and approve it. That's basically the gist of the introduction. I would turn it over to the applicant to give a more detailed presentation. Oh, and before I do that, I should say we did re-advertise for the July 15th meeting since the July 1st was canceled. So it's been properly advertised in the newspaper, posted on the property, and mailed notices to the applicable people to receive them.
Ron, Don, hi. Good evening, everyone. Would you like me to do a quick presentation of the project?
Absolutely. You can do whatever you'd like to get the point out there. It's over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So I was contacted by the Fosters and the Tolles to help them design their project with the intent of adding, if you've been able to look at the plans, each of the projects added a screen porch, which was the real driver, but we also added some space behind that. The Tolles added a...
And
Yep.
Steve, if you'd like to present anything, feel free to click the share.
Thank you very much. I will do screen share right now.
Absolutely. Take your time to doing that. No issue.
All right. Can you see that?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right, okay, sure. So this is the toll side of the project. This is the Foster side. The Tolls wanted to add a family room because obviously when you walk into the house, there's not much privacy. So the sort of the thought was that we needed something more private in the back, and then we want to add a screen porch onto the back to take advantage of the nice seasons that we have in this region. On the Foster side, the driver was the screen porch because they too, both of these families have really nice backyards, so they wanted to be able to enjoy it, without getting eaten by bugs. So it's a reasonable request to be able to do that, I think. And I think that the other part of the project that the Fosters wanted to do was add this area up here as a little office area for some work that they need to do. Before we started this project, we made an effort to go back and look at all the requirements because we understood that what we wanted to do was probably going to fall outside the 3250 guideline. But even with that said, we made sure that the design, and I'm going to scroll down to the elevations because I think that the real elevations really is the driver for this project. We wanted to make sure that we sort of continued the shape of the building. We didn't do anything fancy. We wanted to make sure that everything fit in the context architecturally with the buildings around, and made sure that whatever we were doing did not impact the front of the units, the duplex, the street front. And so this is what we came up with. And we did go through the Architecture and Planning Committee, who actually made some recommendations that we implemented, which was basically to reduce the size of the columns, and try to sort of pull this thing together. And I think it was a good comment too, because the idea is we're going to have one contractor do this. And what we were hoping to do was to continue this molding area, the molding here that you can see, that would sort of drive the project and sort of grab it from both sides of the house and the front. So it would look like a complete thought. So we were striving to really make this thing architecturally simple, but also fitting in the context of the rest of the architecture in the area. And that's it. If anybody has any questions about the details or construction, we can talk about that if that's useful.
Mr. Scott, have you received any community comment?
Other than the Eastport Civic Association's comment letter back, which was supportive of the project, we've gotten nothing from any other member of the public.
Has the applicant had conversations with the budding neighbors, et cetera?
I can speak to that. We have, there's a business on one side of the property with a business owner of the property and an operational manager there. We've had conversations there, had conversations with our immediate neighbor to the other side of the property, have had conversations with, informal conversations with probably we know all of our neighbors in this area, including Diane, who's just a couple doors down from us. So she knows our property well. She can speak to it, I think. So we've good luck. Those kind of comments, hope it goes well. And again, the fact that it doesn't impact the front of the street anyway, people seem to think it's fine from everyone that we've spoken to. So no one wrote a letter, but we've had multiple conversations.
You have an overall plan view that you can display handy right now, like that was provided to the city, that shows a budding property? Perhaps Google Earth would be the best thing if you could just do that.
I don't have that handy. Can someone else do that? Or I can try to pull that up?
No, come on.
Was that a come on, do it?
I don't know who that was. That Bob, you don't want to do that? You don't want to look at it? Just trying to give everybody a general essay if they don't have the essay. If you don't have it in your, do you have it in part of your plan package? Okay, that's fine, because we're going to continue this hearing anyway, so we can put that on for the future. But yes, nothing from the neighbors. We've received nothing from staff, so it seems pretty benign thus far. So
I have a quick question. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great.
Diana, before we continue with your question, we took you as a vote for yes for the minutes with just your modification to the minutes that you sent me, and that's all we modified it. So are you in agreement with that?
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that my recusal lasted between meetings, and I just wanted to put that on the record, just in case, just in case.
Perfect. I know what you mean. In this environment, I would too. Yeah. So good move. We added it, and now you can proceed on with your question for this. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah,
the
so I have to say, number one, I do know the applicants here, and I do feel like I can be fair and unbiased in the decision. So I would like not have to recuse myself. But if anyone would like me to recuse myself, I would really appreciate knowing that now and the basis for the recusal.
You're only a neighbor a few doors down. You're not in a budding property, are you?
Right, I'm sort of across the street and catty corner.
I mean, for God's sakes, yeah, you're good. That's
Well, is there anyone else on the call that would like to challenge me because I know the Fosters? Okay, because I need that to be on the record. So I'm just going to say for the record, no one challenged that I have a conflict. And I don't know, is Joelle on the line? Joelle Braithwaite?
I am.
City of Annapolis is also present, as well
great.
as Attorney Beard.
Thank you so much. So would it be okay for me to vote on this? Because they are neighbors and friends of mine. I feel like I can be unbiased in making the decision about this.
I think that's a question for Mr. Beard.
You feel that you can make a decision, be unbiased either way, and that your knowing them might influence your decision today.
Knowing them will not influence my decision, and I feel like I can be unbiased. And I actually do have a couple of questions on top of that statement.
Well, if you can make a decision and be unbiased, I see no conflict.
Okay, thank you. So my question is, and I asked Tom Smith this, and I think he sent me an email and I can't find it right now. And the question is, how much additional lot coverage does this plan add?
Diane, I can answer that. I did send you the email on,
Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin, it was you.
I did on June 28th. I sent it back to you. The 414 side adds 230 square feet. And the 416 side adds 373 square feet. Both properties, when it's all said and done, still are under the 50% limit.
50%. Okay, great. That's really what I needed to know. One of the other questions is, and Kevin, this is really for you, is how are we keeping track as a peninsula in the additional lot coverages for Eastport? Because at some point, you know, we put the limit on the square footage for what we could build in Eastport based on, you know, obvious reasons. We're trying to make sure that the creeks aren't overburdened and that we don't have too much runoff. So who is keeping track of that? So we know when we're hitting our maximum.
Well, right now we keep track permit by permit. There's for IDA, there's for residential, there's a 50% limit. And as you know, in the different designations, LDA 25% or 15%, depending on the size of the lot, and commercial has different limits too. So we go by what the code requires, and it's a permit by permit basis.
So essentially no one's tracking the overall amount of additional impervious surface that we're adding. That's just all I wanted to capture verbally here.
Diane, this is Sally. For the comprehensive plan, we will be looking at that. We have a way of tracking it with GIS. We just have to make sure all our layers match and coordinate with what we did in 2009, but we will be able to do that annually once we figure out the technology.
Great, and I thought so. I just wanted to make clear that we're not doing it now. So what we're doing is essentially adding more impervious surface without any, you know, regard to what it's doing to our peninsula, which is fine. I just want to make sure we know that. It's just something we need to be aware of. Okay, thank you. Thanks for answering
And
my
just
question.
if I can just follow up to, so it's not complete with that regard because they do have to do mitigation for this increase in coverage, which the plans do show. So they are complying with the laws as they exist.
Oh, thank you, because I wasn't sure what the mitigation was. The plans were rather, you know, interesting, but I couldn't really figure out what the mitigation was. And so what was that?
Steve, if you can scroll, I don't know if, do you have the
I do.
landscape plan up, but it's the, is that the sheet right there? I think if you zoom in on that corner, it's right there.
Right, this is,
So that,
yeah, let me just,
if you zoom in on the table,
Sure.
it'll show the trees that'll be planted.
I can
for
almost
the,
see them, but I can't.
I'll
you
make
probably-
it,
well, you have the package in front of you,
Okay.
I think, or at least by email, so you can zoom in closer. But that table shows the lot coverage numbers that I also emailed to you.
Yep.
And then the plan shows the plant symbols for what's being planted on the site. It's not a whole lot for this project. It's not a really big project in the,
Right.
you know, in the cosmic world of things, but they are meeting the requirements and they're showing the plants.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other commissioners have any questions for the presentation? Okay, we can move on to public comment and opening this up for public comment. We're now opening for public comment, and we have none on the record that I've seen from staff, and I want to confirm that once again from staff. Have you received any public comments, online submission or email?
You are correct that there are none. Nobody signed up to speak and nobody submitted anything in writing.
All right, thank you very much. And on that note, we can therefore continue this item till our next meeting in August and move on down the agenda.
Mr. Sale, I forgot to send you the exhibit listing, but we do have 3 exhibits. And the first one is the staff report. The second one is the ECA letter. And then the third one is the RNC application. That's it.
Sorry, I was muted there. Thank you very much, Tammy. We'll enter all of these into the record as noted. Okay, moving on down the record for the agenda. Thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll see you guys on the August meeting, okay?
thank you. Appreciate your time.
Awesome.
And that's August 5th.
And you will get some emails for that from staff. Thank you. Moving on down to ordinance O, TAC 25, TAC 21, the waterfront maritime zoning districts. This is the first presentation, and this will also be continued to August 5th. And I will hand this over to staff for the presentation. And we do have public comment already received, which I can present on the screen today. So staff.
Mr. Chairman, before you begin, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I hear you.
I want to ask a question. Does any member of the Planning Commission own any property within the waterfront maritime zoning district? And
Nope.
I'm just doing a conflict check.
Nope.
No, I'm close, but I'm not, I'm not in any of those zones.
Okay, if saying none, I don't see a problem. I just want to do a conflict check.
As a funny aside, it's almost rhetorical. If you're on the planning commission, you never would have waterfront maritime property, right? Yes. You'd be
right,
enjoying
very
that
well.
property. All right, moving on.
All right.
The ordinance O, TAC 25, TAC 21 waterfront staff. Do you have a report presentation for this?
Good evening, this is Sally. I shared with you my staff report, which is a technical analysis of the ordinance. But before we go into the details of the ordinance, I'd like to turn it over to Eileen Fogarty, who has a presentation tonight. And is she going to share it, or Eric, are you going to share it?
Julian is actually going to share it.
Julian. Okay, Julian's going to get it queued up. So I'm turning it over to Eileen.
Well, good evening. We are thrilled and delighted to be joining you this evening. We may or may not be joining. Okay, there it is. To be joining you this evening to present the Maritime Task Force, their work, their efforts over the last, it's now been 8 months. And what we will be presenting tonight is the task force report, Strengthening the Industry, and the accompanying ordinance O2521. And the next slide goes to Dr. Nash.
Hello again. Yes, I want to first of all start by thanking Eileen for her work on this task force, getting the task force coordinated, building consensus, and then getting us to the point where we could even work on an ordinance, which is, as you all know, lightning fast for the city. And I think one of the things that's helped Eileen build momentum is the sense of urgency that for years we've been hearing about issues that maritime property owners and the people who are in the industry have been having, struggling to keep things going in a city where prices are rising and the industry itself is changing. So we need to be more flexible. We need to look at updating our zoning code from 1987. And this is the results that you will see tonight are a reflection of a consensus we've built between the three interests of the residents, the industry, and the property owners themselves. And it's, tricky to balance the needs of all these groups. We didn't get consensus on every topic, but what you are seeing tonight is what the work group approved of and supported. And we feel like it will help the industry moving forward. It's not major zoning changes, but rather some smaller tweaks to give us an opportunity to allow for a little bit more flexibility for people in the industry who are struggling. Eileen?
Thanks very much. Julian, next slide. So the question is, with what Sally has just said, how did this task force come together to reach success? As the Planning Commission is very well aware, any successful planning effort must be based on a broad-based consensus. So here you have representatives from the industry. We always say that, but who is the industry? Boat repair, fabrication, Patrick Shaughnessy with FAR Design, John Stefanchek with I don't want to say the wrong magazine because Mary Ewenson has one and John Stefanchek has one, but both with the publications in the maritime industry. John Norton with the boat, I was going to say boat club, boat yard. So you had a wide variety. And remember, the task force was evenly divided with roughly 10 to 12 people from each of the stakeholder groups. Residents were from Ward 1, Ward 7, Ward 8, and there were some citywide representatives as well. Property owners represented WMM, WME, both in Eastport, and WMI along Bemby Beach and Edgewood Road. Public interest, the Park Service, the Maritime Museum, Spa Creek Conservancy, the Riverkeeper, Chesapeake Bay Trust. And then people like John Hammond, financial expert, land use experts, economic development specialists, Stephen Rice from the city, actually Susan Zellers, who has an extensive economic development background, and also the Economic Development Office in Anne Arundel County. We have Bob Waldman from the Planning Commission. We have the Maritime Advisory Board with Terry Lomax, Maryland Maritime Trades Association. So you have all of these people and you have literally hundreds of years of experience in the industry and expertise that was brought to bear. Next slide, please. The process you've been involved in, two of those yellow circles are the Planning Commission, and we are now at the third Planning Commission workshop. The process was transparent, it was public, and all stakeholders were represented, not just a single group of stakeholders. The negotiations, debate, work sessions took about 7 months. Now it's been a little over 8 months with coming forward to you tonight. There were 25 task force meetings and work sessions. Again, each work group was a combination representing all of the stakeholders' interests so that you didn't have any one group that was weighed one direction or the other. And there were 12 public work sessions. So it was a highly transparent process. And with that said, the next slide goes to Will Scott, Dr. Scott.
Well, thank you, Eileen, and thank you to the commissioners for hearing us again. And because we've worked with you and spoken with you about this in the past, I'm going to try to be brief and just emphasize how what we have done is really built on the foundation that I believe I mentioned the last time we spoke with you. As a member of the Planning Commission, roughly 30 some years ago when the zones were created, I was gratified at that time to see the extensive public input and outreach that took place and the way in which we dealt with a crisis in the maritime districts or maritime areas at that point of the city that had to do with land use and the perspective or prospect of land uses that would be allowed under the existing zoning at that time, increasing property values almost certainly in a way that would drive the maritime industry away from the city. So with a foundation of broad community input and hard work by the staff and the Planning Commission at that time, and all the different parties that Eileen has already referred to, we crafted these zoning districts that have been quite successful. And they address the fact that different waterfront areas that were utilized by the maritime industry at that time had different characteristics then. And that's why we have different zones for the maritime industry, both to respect what was there, but also to try to assure that what we wanted to see in those districts would continue. Now, 30 some years later, we see that further changes in the industry, in society, and in our community require a serious revisitation of these zones and their effectiveness. And as Eileen just said so well and so thoroughly, we have involved all of the affected constituencies of the Annapolis community. And we feel that we have built upon the hard work that was done 30 some years ago, and we can provide for a successful future for the maritime industry in our community, which is part of our history and heritage, and we wish to see continue into the future of our community. So that's basically the way in which we've built on the past to create a better future for not just the maritime industry, but our community at large. Thank you, Eileen.
Thanks, Will, very much. Julian, the next slide. I think Will laid out the foundation, and very early on, the task force decided that they wanted, and it was a decision, do you want to completely redo these districts? Do you want to take a different approach? Or do you want to build upon the success that we have seen over the last 34 years? They decided categorically that they wanted to keep the districts, the distinct districts, and that they wanted to keep the foundational elements, which were the critical mass that you have to have hubs of maritime services and repair if we're going to be a mid-Atlantic regional center. Secondly, really prioritizing the land-intensive uses, and those are the working boat yards, because without those large working yards, we don't have the critical mass or the hubs. So the other decision they made very early on was that they reached consensus that they wanted the districts to be primarily maritime. They did not want to dilute them. They did not want to have a mix of uses throughout the districts. So with those decisions, the task force looked at and debated numerous occasions the existing triggers. In other words, what is it that the city and the community should expect from you who are zoned maritime if we are to give you flexibility with non-maritime use? The existing zoning was very, very specific in looking at large land-intensive activities, 25,000 square feet, on-land boat storage, 30-ton lift with a 20,000 square foot working yards. Seafood processing was also included. And the task force came to the conclusion that absolutely they did not want to expand that or dilute it, that they added, as you will hear tonight, fuel docks, which they felt were critical. But other than that, they only wanted to see flexibility for those sites that had significant and essential elements needed to continue the maritime industry. And they also agreed that any future non-maritime would be calculated based on existing buildings. They did not want to incentivize people to build new office buildings on their boat yards and then calculate that for more maritime. Next slide, please. With all that said, okay, thank you, Julian. What you're going to hear tonight is a conservation strategy. It's a strategy that the task force believes will absolutely ensure the viability of the maritime districts, as well as addressing the urgent needs. And the main elements in it, which are reflected in both the plan and the ordinance, first is targeted flexibility for preserving and reinvesting in core maritime uses that anchor the industry and the districts. Secondly, limited restaurant allowances tied to working yards, a dedicated maritime fund to attract, retain, grow new businesses, investment in recruiting and training a workforce, a water access strategy to incentivize water access on private land as well as public land. And there's a recommendation for a water access plan, which the city will be working on. Eric will be working on with the National Park Service. And the last item was very important to the residents, and that was an ongoing evaluation of the maritime industry, its progress, and what is taking place in the district. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Susan Zellers. Next slide, please.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see everyone again. So we're talking, my portion is to talk about the industry, what makes this up. And Eileen has done a great job of outlining all of this, but most important to everyone is, what does this industry mean to Annapolis? What difference does it make if it's here or it's not? Why are we trying to preserve it? That sort of thing. And so I want to outline first the jobs, and that's obvious, but the atmosphere that it creates is why people choose to live here. And it also changes the value of the property.
Next slide, Julian.
So these 7,800 boats that are located in the two Annapolis zip codes are what create that atmosphere. And those 7,800 boats that are located in this area are located here because the zoning was put into place that 30 some years ago. That hub that we've created is what the most important thing is to the maritime industry, and preserving that. This industry brings 2.4 million in property tax value, and that's every single year. This is a $3.5 billion economic impact here to the state of Maryland. And Annapolis captures a great big portion of that because the majority of the boats registered in the state of Maryland are registered in Anne Arundel County. Next slide, please. So looking at the industry and listening to them and asking them, what do you need? The loud and clear from the beginning was, you've got to figure out a way how to preserve this hub, not let these businesses move from the area, make sure that they stay here, because it's when that boat comes into one of these marinas or comes in as either as a visitor or as a resident, the fact that they can get soup to nuts on their boat, everything done, whether it's being hauled and bottom painted, or whether it's just getting outfitted, or whether it's buying things to go on the boat or canvas work or whatever it is, it can all be done in this small area. And that's that hub that we need to protect. The industry was very clear that to protect that, we have to keep it at 50% or below non-maritime. We can't go over that amount or it's no longer a hub. We also understood that we had to establish the right flexibility for WMM so that it could continue. What do they need to make this make sense without it becoming non-maritime, going over that 50%, and to place appropriate values on the triggers. This ordinance that we've drafted, we believe, does all of those things. Zoning is just one piece of the puzzle. Even though everyone focuses on that piece, it's really just one piece of the puzzle. The key here is to understand that the solutions that we're presenting here are designed to support the industry as a whole, not just with the zoning, but with all of the other things that we've introduced here. When the industry is strong, then the individuals are going to be strong as well. When I started the Marine Trades Industry Partnership for Workforce Development back in 2014 or 15, a lot of the business owners thought, oh, good, I'm going to fill all of their open positions for them. It took a few years for them to understand that it was about building a sustainable workforce for the entire state of Maryland, for the city of Annapolis, for that. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to fill every one of Rod Jabin's openings. But that's the point. We're trying to create this thing that works and survives. And that's what we've done with this ordinance and with tweaking what we had here in the maritime zones. Next slide, please. So as we're looking to do this, in addition to that zoning, what are we doing to grow this future maritime, to make this sustainable maritime? And we came up with these ideas of not only promoting Annapolis as this mid-Atlantic center, but looking how we can recruit and relocate and retain these essential maritime businesses and industries. The workforce training is key. We've gone over that with not only the aldermen and how they can take advantage of that with their constituents, but also for the maritime businesses, how our workforce development efforts can help there. Streamlining the permit process for certain maritime zones, trying to coordinate all the different moving parts and making a commitment to make that a blueprint for how they can get through that. And then this continued exploration of blue technology with Steve, which Stephen and his crew have done a great job of starting and doing some research on, commitment to making that continue. And then this development of a maritime fund and being able to use that for all of those things together. Next slide. And next person.
Rod Jabin, next slide.
Good evening. My name is Rod Jabin, and I'm the second generation owner of the Jabin Yacht Yard here on Edgewood Road, or in the WMI. And the thing that I think one of the takeaways that I want you to make sure you understand is this is for the viability of not only the maritime districts, but also the industry, because the districts are so diverse. If you look at this map and look at the areas in WMM versus WMI, WMM is full of office buildings and WMI is full of working hard maritime facilities. A lot of the pictures you've seen tonight are there. So if we just talk about just some of the challenges that are experienced by the property owners, you know, the whole industry and environment is changing that we operate in. The environmental regulations are extreme in what we have to do. The cost of doing business is just incredible. And then add to that the new code requirements for achieving those calculated gains makes it really, really challenging. Property taxes, while we're restricted in who we can rent to and have very little flexibility in WMI, our property taxes continue to rise. I know it says on this slide that the taxes are up 11.6% since 2000, but here on the Jabin property, since 1998, my taxes have doubled. And so they continue to go up while we're still restricted in who we can rent to and stuff. And that causes challenges with lenders because they look at the restrictive ability for you to rent your available space to, and they scrutinize you very, very carefully. Not to mention the cost of construction in rebuilding the piers and bulkheads, and the cost of that continues to rise. Add to that the trends that we see or the evolution of the marine industry. One of the things that we say is that anybody now with a cell phone in a car can be a yacht broker. No longer do they need a bricks and mortar facility to operate. And the slow reduction in demand for office space, like we see in WMM for maritime tenants, is real. And it becomes more and more challenging to find these tenants all the time as technology has evolved and allowed you to operate from home, to operate out of your car with a smartphone and a tablet. There's not too much you can't get done. The other thing is that while we are in a boom time now with the boating industry, and people say, why do we need to address this now? Everything's going great. Well, it's a really good question because everything's not going great. If you look at the areas in WMM and as well as WME, there's several property owners that are experiencing high vacancy rates in their office space because of the restrictive zoning. And that's really the crux of the issue. If we're experiencing these sorts of vacancies in a booming economy, booming boating economy, we are really challenged in the down cycles. And this marine industry is very cyclical. And when times are good, it's great. When the stock market goes down, we all suffer tremendously. Add to that the challenge of the districts. I touched on it a little bit, but just think about the difference between WMM walking down Severn Avenue and looking at Annapolis City Marina and walking down Edgewood Road and coming into the Hard Maritime Boatyard. We hosted an event here at the Javen Yacht Yard with the council, and I think it was enlightening to see the difference. And so when we are talking about adding flexibility to non-maritime use, we are really talking about helping out the districts be successful. They are so diverse in what each district needs that it is a complicated situation, but we think that we're making an effort to address all of that. Next slide, please. So what are we asking for? So the task force recommends modest flexibility to sustain the thriving boating industry as well as the maritime districts. And so you heard Eileen talk a little bit about triggers. And these triggers are what is essential for a core working maritime operation. We need fuel stations. We need seafood processing. We need 25,000 square foot on-land boat storage. We need travel lifts and boat lift operations, and we need places to store boats. And so those sorts of triggers are incredibly important to continue to sustain the maritime industry here in Annapolis. You've heard about the boating hubs and all of that stuff, but it really is true. If you use the Javen Yacht Yard as an example, we have over 27 different tenants that specialize in everything from carpentry to canvas. And it is a place where you can, it's a destination facility. And that's what Annapolis is known for whether you're commissioning a brand new boat or whether you're refitting an old one. And without these triggers, we start to erode that capability. So what we're asking for is that the triggers continue to be an essential part of the flexibility, and that we add also the fuel docks to those existing triggers, because for whatever reason, fuel docks were left out. But we think that fuel docks are incredibly important to the experience of the boater in Annapolis. On to this idea of flexibility. We're recommending an additional 15% flexibility to be allowed only with the triggers for all the districts. WMM already has a 30% flexibility for non-maritime use, and we're recommending an additional 15% that will take them to 45%. WME and WMI, we are requesting 15% that's added to right now the most restrictive zone, which is 0. So the biggest gain will be for WMM, where there are already existing office buildings, very different than what you see in WME and WMI. And so while a 15% increase for WMM is significant, in my case, if I use the Jabin Yacht Yard as an example, we're hard maritime. I don't have office buildings per se. And so what 15% means to me is about a 2,500 square foot flexibility. And that is a very modest amount of non-maritime use in our facility. And it's just one of those things where we thought we had to address the equitable nature of, if we're going to increase flexibility for WMM, we have to spread that across all the districts. And the other thing that we think is important is to continue to evaluate what these changes mean and the condition and strength of the industry and the districts over time. So that includes annual reporting to the Planning Commission and evaluations of the district strategy. And I think that's very important. We haven't done that for 34 years, but if we put that into this ordinance, then we can track it and address it as things evolve. Next slide, please. In addition to that, those steps that we talked about strengthening the districts, we also are trying to incorporate uses that contribute to the success of the hard maritime activities. If you refer back to the map that we looked at a minute ago, you'll see that the WMI areas are mostly really big sites. If I use the Jabin analogy one more time, we have over 18 acres here where we store boats and work on boats. As you heard me say, we have over 27 different tenants. I have probably over 250 workers here every single day. And one of the things that has been identified is this concept of restaurants. If you go anywhere on the East Coast or nationally, part of a successful marina operation is the ability to get food and beverage at the facility, because again, the marinas are evolving now where it is an experience for the weekend, it's an experience for the whole duration of which you're at the marina, and you want to be able to offer all those services to improve your experience at the marina. And every place you look, restaurants are generally an allowed use in a maritime zone. So if we talk about WMI, we all agreed that there was a great argument to be made to have a moderate scaled restaurant up to 4,000 square feet, subject to all the standards that are existing for indoor and outdoor dining, and that we could incorporate in these bigger sites in WMI to level the playing field. When we talk about restaurants in WME, we started off with trying to get the same sort of concept through with WME, but WME is a very different district and it is really close to residents. It has very tight spaces, and as we went out to the community and saw input and stuff, we got a lot of pushback in restaurants, additional restaurants in the WME. So we are requesting a 2,000 square foot maximum use under a conditional use, which is what it's going on right now. And unless we can get community involvement, we just don't think that there's room for much more. The other part that the ordinance offers is to write into the code the complementary uses that sometimes already are existing in the marinas. And what I mean by that is the use of accessory things like pools, fitness centers, laundromats, event spaces, and other activities that generally occur just like in this picture here where there's a small gathering under a tent, and to write that into the code so that we don't have to go out and get a one-day permit for any of these temporary uses. Next slide.
Rod, thanks so much. I think we're going to turn this over to Mike Tomasini.
Thanks, Eileen. Thanks, Rod. Well said. For those of you who don't know me, Mike Tomasini, my wife and I own and operate Pirate Adventures on the Chesapeake here out of Eastport. I also live in or adjacent to two maritime zone properties in the WME. We've been at this for a while. There, as Eileen said, 25 meetings. It seems like more. I'm sure everybody on the task force in this room would agree. It seems like more than 25 meetings. But we tried to balance the scales to bring a true consensus, and part of that included feedback from the residents. So one of the things that we thought was the best about what exists right now in Annapolis versus some of these other cities in the Eastern Seaboard is the existing access points here in Annapolis, whether it's a view of the water, which is important, or the ability to walk along the water. They exist here already because of these large open spaces on the water, which are the working yards. So you don't have to squeeze yourself into some alleyway to get down to the end of the street to get a view of the Capitol building over the water or see a sailboat. You've got these large expansive spaces without these high-rise buildings, and you're not fighting against them. So the ordinance is supporting those land-intensive uses, the working yards that allow for the water to rise up over them and then recede the following day or the following week and continue those views of the water. One of the things we really wanted to prevent was this kind of walling off of the water from the residents of the city, right? You don't want to put in these large structures like hotels or condo buildings that prevent you from being able to access the water. The last thing you want to do is meet a fence when you're walking up to the waterfront. You want to be able to get there, maybe dip your feet in, maybe bring your kids down there and throw a fishing pole in. So I think what a lot of is existing right now in the town and the continuity along the water, especially in the WMM and the WME, are these kind of passive access to the water. One of the other things that the residents were very strongly vocal about was not exceeding that 50% non-maritime use. They felt that if we tipped above the 50%, that it wasn't really maritime anymore. It became something different. Maritime was an afterthought, and we didn't want that to happen. We did talk a lot about the restaurant uses in the WMI, especially with their proximity to county marinas and county places that have the ability to have a restaurant like Sam's on the waterfront, which is directly across the street from Rod Jabin's property. So we wanted to be able to allow that as part of a marina experience and not have it limited to kind of like a self-service deli counter with a fridge in the back. We thought that today's marina customer, slightly larger boats, slightly more sophisticated amenities, the folks that own those boats were going to want to be able to get off with their family and grab a burger and a beer after their day on the water before they headed back to wherever they were from. I think the most important part, the thing that we really worked on was it's been 30 plus years since anything has been done for the maritime zones. So as a result, providing for some kind of ongoing enforcement and reporting mechanism that said, hey, the changes we made in 2021, did they actually do anything for the property owners? Who did they help? Who did they hurt? And can we revisit it down the road and make tweaks to the zones without having to wait another 30 years? So that was something that came out of a lot of discussions. I think it's probably the most important piece of the ordinance. And then we also created, you can go to the next slide, an opportunity to incentivize property owners to provide water access to the residents of the city. One more, next slide. The framework for this was to try and enhance the public's access to the water here in the Maritimes, in and around the maritime zones. What we talked about is the potential for public-private partnerships for the improvement of street end parks, to make them, maybe more than what they are. A really good example is, if any of you have been down to the end of 5th Street on Spa Creek, adjacent to the Annapolis City Marina property, it's really just a bunch of bricks in a pile between two commercial properties that could really use some love. And it's a really nice place to access the water there because it's close to the public parking garage at ACM. It's within reach for most members of the community. And you can go either way when you come out of that property. If it's a windy, rainy day, you don't have to go right and be smack dab in the middle of the harbor surrounded by larger boats. You can really get a nice, quiet water usage down through the back of the creek. We wanted to leverage the underutilized public access opportunities. I think there's been a lot of discussion about the access points at Wells Cove and what's the one in the back? The Hawkins Cove. Yeah, I think that those are places that the community should have really good access points that are it just hasn't, and nothing's been done to do that. And the maritime districts are a better complement to the community amenities. It's really, I mean, I think if you talk to 10 residents who live in or near the maritime zones, the reason that they're here has something to do with a boat. Either they work in the industry, or they have a boat, or they someday dream to have a boat. Next slide.
So, also on this topic of water access, I'm Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning for the city. We benefited tremendously to have Wendy O'Sullivan from the National Park Service on this task force. So you think about the reasons why the National Park Service has chosen to invest in Annapolis. A lot of that is because of what we have here within our maritime districts, the activity and authenticity and intensity that they have needs to continue for the sort of revamped Chesapeake Gateways program the National Park Service is envisioning, for that to be successful. But at the same time, we're in the midst of a growing awareness, as Mike mentioned, of the sort of inequities of existing water access in the city, and that's on the minds of the National Park Service as well. So we kind of put our heads together on this with the task force, and we're able to see the need for a really specific public water access plan. It's been 15 years since the city did a citywide parks and trails master plan. We did a bikeways master plan in 2011. And with all of the interest in achieving greater water access equity in the city, the maritime districts are sort of positioned to be a part of that. But really to get the kind of access we're talking about, it's not, it can't just be the city buying more property, and create more parks. That has to be a part of kind of public-private framework where waterfront properties can assist in investing in the waterfront. And there's obviously a synergy that comes with increased waterfront activity for the businesses that are located there. So from a comprehensive planning perspective, there's kind of an amplified success there. And so what we have here on this slide are just some of the things that, as we move forward in defining the scope of a public water access plan, it's not just about finding new places for parks on the water, but it's what are the standards for connecting sites on the water. What's the kind of access infrastructure that's going to really improve the chances of more people using the waterfront, and then the programs that even if you have new paddle opportunities, you want to make sure that people can use those that don't have their own boat, that have been sort of inhibited from getting in a paddle craft, and they have a chance to do that. So it all kind of contributes to this equitable access framework. And we did do an inventory of the existing street and parks as part of our report, and that's in the appendix. I think this plan would go into much greater detail on that, but you can kind of see what we came up with there. I'm gonna pass it back now.
Mike?
Yep. Next slide.
Mike, this one's yours.
Yep, got it. Thank you, Eileen. All right, so part of what we came up with was, number one, how do we incentivize water access for the community as a part of this process? It was clearly something that was desired. It was mentioned in several of our public outreach campaigns. So the water access incentive right now as it stands is a 5% additional non-maritime flexibility. And you can get at that extra 5% in a couple of different ways. In our discussions with the public and our outreach with the community associations, we developed this kind of hierarchy of where we go. So a first tier incentive, kind of a bigger bite at the apple would be a new enhanced street end park investment of $125,000. The concept of a community boating facility was something that was brought up, someplace where people could either store boats that they own or, commingle in boats that they don't own, pay a membership fee, and then have direct access to a floating dock to launch, those kinds of craft. And then because these mixed zones where there's a lot of commercial and a lot of residential, we talked about the ability to relieve some of the parking pressures in these zones. So one way to do that was for a property with the ability to provide residents and businesses 50 spaces that could be used in a shared parking agreement to lessen the burden of parking in these neighborhoods. Second tier incentives, we talked about the possibility of a public promenade along the waterfront. Basically a long stretch of maybe not a boardwalk, but a grassy area where you could walk through and enjoy views of the water while sipping on a coffee. Affordable paddling and boating improvements. So more floating docks, more car top boat launches, more sandy entrances, dedicated slip space for tour operators. There are a lot of very unique water-oriented tour operators in the city, and dedicated slip space for city-owned water assets, harbor master, fireboat, those kinds of things that are essential to maintaining safety on the water. And then also dedicated space for a water taxi landing. Water taxi right now operates both out of Back Creek and Spa Creek and can kind of take you anywhere in the city so long as you're within that zone. More access points means basically that more people can get downtown or get to Back Creek without having to jump in their cars, and that's a good thing.
Mike, thanks so much. The next slide after this. So what the task force is recommending to the Planning Commission is that you actually endorse the action plan. You will adopt it when the comp plan comes forward, that you adopt O2521. And the task force believes that this strategic approach will create both a vibrant and a sustainable future for the industry. It's really three components. Almost all of the actions and priorities you've heard presented this evening are incorporated into the ordinance O2521, reinforcing the districts, restricting incompatible uses, prioritizing land intensive uses, contributing restaurants with contributing uses. Mike, you are on, your mic is on.
Sorry.
Mike. The other piece is the Annapolis Maritime Industry Fund and programs that Susan talked about, and is very much the brainchild of Patrick Shaughnessy, and that is creating the programs for workforce development as well as recruiting, retaining the industry. And the third piece is what Mike just described. That is the incentives for water access are in the ordinance and the waterfront plan, the waterfront district. Eric, as you can see from what was forwarded today on their early starts on water access planning and strategic approach is already underway. So those are the three components. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Will Scott. Next slide.
Thank you, Eileen, and thanks to all of my fellow task force members for their excellent presentations. We've spoken to you a number of times as a group already, and I think all of you on the Planning Commission realize how hard it is to get a group of people with really strongly divergent interests in the maritime districts to work so hard together with so many meetings and so much effort and so much interest in fair play and equitable treatment of everyone involved, and still form a consensus that we can all endorse. It is unusual today, as I think I've said before, to find a group of people with the kind of background and experience of people like Susan and Rod and Mike to work this hard and to hear so many different opinions and work in good faith to build this consensus. The consensus was hard won. And if you decide, and we're here because your opinions and your input and your insights are so valuable to the community. But if you are to start to substantially change this, I think you run the risk of essentially moving the process back to square one. The chair mentioned a communication that he's going to share with all of you. If it's the one that I'm familiar with, you're going to hear two things that I think are, frankly, red herrings. One, that we've been arbitrary in making our decisions. Eileen has outlined how many times we've met with the public and how open and transparent we've been. You've heard the testimony, the presentations of my fellow task force members and how divergent their perspectives are and how extensive their experience is. And you'll also perhaps be hearing that somehow we're not being fair because we're not treating all of the districts the same. It was actually Rod who made tonight a very effective presentation on how the districts are different. And we wish them to continue to be different for very sound reasons in the interest of the community at large. So the final thing that I will say is I ask you on behalf of all of the task force members to take this as a whole, review it, consider it, make the changes that you think are necessary and beneficial. But remember how hard fought this consensus was. And I encourage you to adopt our recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And that concludes our presentation.
Hey, thank you very much, Ms. Fogarty and everyone else. It's a good presentation. Now we'll move on to Commissioner.
Ben, could I just interrupt for a second?
Okay, Dr. Sally.
Sorry, Mr. Beard asked if anyone owned property in a maritime district, so that includes rental property. Diane, do you own?
Yeah, you know what? When he asked that question, all I could think of was where I live. But I do own a property in a maritime. It's actually in WMM, if I'm looking at the map correctly. So does that in any way, because I own a property in a WMM zone, would that in any way hurt me from being able to make a unbiased decision or count me out from being able to decide on this?
Well, I think the better part of valor is for you to recuse yourself unless you can give a reason why you shouldn't be.
Well, because just because I own a property that's within one of the districts doesn't mean that I can't be unbiased. I mean, I have no monetary, so the definition of what your interest is monetary and you know what, like how this would impact my monetary interest in my property that's a rental property. I'm not quite sure that I would have anything that would be, because in particular, it's it's in a building that's not going to change based on any of these recommendations.
Do you own property within a waterfront maritime zoning district?
Yeah, oh yeah, but it's not going to change with any of these recommendations. None of these recommendations impact the building where I live. I mean, where I own.
Then I'm going to recuse you.
What's that?
Then I would ask you to recuse yourself.
No, what I'm saying is where I have a rental property at one of these locations, and it's just a rental property where none of these recommendations actually impact that. Do you understand? None of these recommendations that are on the table impact the rental property that I own. It's a condominium that's been established that's in the WMM, and it doesn't impact, none of the recommendations that are being made impact that building.
Well,
It's
I
not a
asked you
boatyard.
You do own property within a maritime water district, right?
Yeah.
Maritime district.
Yep.
Okay, I'm asking you to recuse yourself.
But you know, all of us own property someplace in the city, and we all look at things that affect us, you know, across citywide. Just a few meetings ago, we talked about marijuana dispensaries. Well, they would affect, you know, all 8 wards.
ADUs affect where we live, you know?
You know, it's a difficult question. This is a difficult situation, and because in some ways it's not a big city. And
That's true, Bob, but remember the ethics also speak to appearance of conflict.
Okay.
And if Diane she's actually in a WME zone, that's true. She's absolutely right. Her building's probably not going to change, but the fact is that this could affect property values in and around that property.
Okay.
And even her property, really. You know, who knows what the future brings. So,
well, I'm looking at isn't it WMM, Sally? I'm looking at the picture of the map, and the condo is in WMM, I believe. Not
no, I believe it is in WME.
No,
Okay.
the
WME.
Tecumseh is in WMM. I
Right.
was just looking at the,
Oh yeah, I see what you're thinking of, Sally, though. You're right. Well, all I want to say is even though I own property there, I don't think I can be, I think I can be unbiased in a decision. So, but you know what? Just because I don't want to make a big deal of this, I feel like this is kind of crazy, because what you want on boards and commissions are people that know their community, know the people in their community. I've lived here for over 20 years. I am part of the boating and maritime community. I use all these services. I talk to Rod Javens. I have my boat hauled. I know how important maritime industry is to our city. So I feel like recusing myself because of a condo that I own, or actually now I'm thinking, yeah, because of property owned in those districts seems really unfortunate. So,
Diane, I'm going to stretch this a little further, because most of us live in R1, 2, or 3. Should we have recused ourselves because ADUs or short-term rentals could have benefited us and where we lived in our houses? I mean, where do we draw the line? You know?
yeah.
So,
Well, how about this, Chris? I have an idea. Why don't I just ask the Ethics Commission to offer an opinion, and I will certainly abide by whatever their opinion is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the driving element to that question. And if you can obtain that, that's what we need.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. That's what I'll do.
All right.
one last comment about this. I think when we get to that section of the agenda where we talk about our rules and procedures, this I think is very relevant.
Yeah.
And now we haven't agreed to those changes, so this doesn't necessarily apply because those are still on the table. But what they do say is that you know, if you can make a logical argument, you should be able to make that logical argument. So just put a pin in that till we get there.
And I think that offers us some additional structure to be able to make our own decisions of conflicts as well, as opposed to before. So I agree with you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just I'll send a letter first thing tomorrow morning to the Ethics Commission asking them for an opinion on this.
All right, so you're still in the game. You're still in the game.
Whatever happens, I look forward to your comments.
There you go.
I think that's a good path forward. So going back to the ordinance, I wanted to check with the commission and see if there was any questions about the specific changes that we're recommending.
I have one specific one in the definitions,
Okay.
and I hopefully somebody on the task force can address this, but it has to do with the definition of sailing club. And I think the operative piece of that, I won't just read the whole thing, but I think the operative piece of that is 150 keel boats. And so in disclosure here, my wife is a member of Severn Sailing Association, and I spent a lot of time there. But I'm not the member. I married into the program. But where does it leave something like SSA, which and part of the definition doesn't include dinghies, and the term dinghy is a little ambiguous because most of the boats at Severn Sailing Association are dinghies in the context of small sailing craft, not tenders for larger boats. So I question, and I know it's only one place, but I question whether Severn Sailing Association would be considered a sailing club under that definition. I don't think so. So maybe somebody can address that.
Alex, I'd be glad to. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
The issue is that a sailing club is a trigger. In other words, if you meet the definition for a sailing club, you can have the non-maritime use. A sailing club, that definition doesn't mean that Severn Sailing is not a sailing club and by right. And actually someone else asked me this, and I'm going to talk to Jacqueline in the city attorney's office to make sure that my understanding is correct, but Severn Sailing is still a sailing club. What it means is that it may not be a trigger for non-maritime activity. It's still a sailing club. It's still allowed and permitted by right. The concern was that without a definition for sailing club, there was the possibility, the opportunity for a site to put in, 10 kayaks and have a trigger. So the concern was that it would be, if it's going to be a trigger, because we had originally discussed taking sailing club out of the trigger category. The decision was to keep it in, but to make it substantial. But my understanding, and I'll confirm with Jacqueline, because this was also asked to me by someone else, that a sailing club is a permitted use. Severn Sailing would be permitted. They may or may not meet the criteria for a trigger for non-maritime use.
Okay, I mean, that makes sense. I'm just always worried about, a definition, getting cast like that and then having an unintended consequence in some other place. And I appreciate that it's with respect to triggers, but I just would worry that it's defined in that way that then somehow causes a problem with something else. So for the lawyers in the crowd to think about, that's sort of beyond my wheelhouse, but something to think about. Thanks.
Thanks. Any other questions about the ordinance itself?
Let me see. I want to look up something and page, go down, make sure. Page 21.
And while you're looking that up, I'll ask Eileen, there was quite a few, all the submissions we had, they said live testimony.
Yes.
But I don't see all of those people here. So
one of them has been on the line, Alice Estrada. She texted me, she's having a concert at the museum and she had to go off for a few minutes, but she will be back. But that's the only one I'm aware of.
If I could just chime in real quick, they're all here. They're at the list as attendees. We're just I was waiting for that moment, and then we'll bring them forward.
Okay. When we get there, and if it helps you expedite things, start bringing them over because we'll be there probably in under 5.
Okay.
Eileen, could you explain to me where shared parking enters into this? Is it simply an incentive after somebody achieves a trigger?
No, when you say shared parking, are you talking about the water access incentive if you're going to provide 50 spaces for the community?
Okay, so it's an incentive which only has life if the property owner has a trigger. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. How did you arrive at the number of 50 parking spaces?
There was discussion, a range of discussions. Some people talked about 75 spaces. The one of the properties, the Annapolis City Marina, talked about 25 to 30. So 50 was it was not a magic number. It was a compromise number.
Okay. Do you know how many spaces there are that the City Marina has?
I think Joe Devlin is going to be one of the speakers, and
Okay.
We could ask him. I
Okay,
know.
I will.
Yeah. Okay.
He has unmuted right now, Eileen. If you if.
Okay.
I just want to say at this stage, but even before I even started asking questions, I should have said I stand in awe of the delicate balance, and it's more than just a delicate balance. It's actually a very strong knot that you've made here to get as far as you have with this, and in the time period that you had to do it in. I'm really in awe. I think that I've listened to Rod Jabin now several times. I find him to be forthright, clear, informative. I've learned a lot of things from what he said. Susan Zellers, I stand in awe of her persuasiveness and her command of the facts, and of everybody who's served on this thing. It's been an incredible experience for me. Having said that, I think that you'll hear, if not tonight, then the next night. You know, I'm a pusher for public access, and I'm going to tell you that I think that there's some very, very, very strong decisions and agreements that have been made that affect the industry as a whole. But what I find lacking is how can we start getting some of that public access back that we've lost over the past 15 years. So I may be coming up with some suggestions and some queries as to maybe what some tweaks simply to the basic consensus and agreement that's been reached to begin to get more access. And if now is the appropriate time for me to start on that, I would be glad to talk. Is Mr. Sale, is that okay?
Of course it is.
Okay. One of the things that, you know, it's, I'm a pusher for it, okay? And that's okay, because I stand for all of the people who don't live near the waterfront and who don't go to waterfront restaurants, but who live in the city of Annapolis and who really like to get down and dip their toe in the water, drop a fishing pole and the like. I'm concerned that what we've done is we've laid off our public access program to the future. That we're going to do another study, we're going to do another plan, it's going to take another 3 years, and we're not really going to be anywhere where we need to do that, because we need to know what it's going to cost to do things in Hawkins Cove and Wells Cove, and what street end parks need what fixing, and what is a community boating facility really going to cost. There's some real hard questions that could only be answered in the kind of study that needs to be done, and thank God it's being started in some way, but it's still 2 or 3 years off. What I'm concerned about is laying into this legislation a few things that really begin to make the point and establish the policy that public access is part of getting these incentives. That if you want to get more non-maritime use, if you want to get a restaurant, then you got to allow the public onto your property in appropriate ways. They can't just wander around where boats are being fabricated or sanded and painted and all of the like, but you're having people come to a public restaurant. And if I go to Chesapeake Harbor to go to their restaurant, I can go onto the waterfront. So I think that there are appropriate ways that if a property has a public restaurant, there needs to be some public access. And I think that is the kind of a tweak that we need to see. And especially with a couple of properties in WME who are going to be wanting putting restaurants on their property. The other thing that I think maybe we might think of, I don't know that the ordinance is the place for it. I'm not quite sure where it should be, but is the notion of gates and fences. To what extent should we allow gates and fences? And consistent with that thought is how are we enforcing conditions on properties that agreed to allow public access through and across their properties and not to erect fences, but have anyway? It's a big hole. Or no, actually that's the wrong metaphor. It's not a big hole, it's a big fence, one that you can't get through. So I also wonder, this is more a point of just detail and definition, complementary uses. I understand a laundry room and, some things like that, but swimming pools and the like, are these included in the non-maritime use, or are they just thrown in as extras, or how do we account for them, and where do they fall? As a lawyer, it concerns me that it's pretty slippery language, and I'm concerned about that kind of thing. So where do complementary uses fall?
Would you like me to answer that, Bob?
I would, thanks.
If complementary uses are not counted as non-maritime. They fall into the category of accessory use. So they have a lot of limitations on them as an accessory use, but they do not count as non-maritime.
What are the limitations? For instance, what are the limitations?
Sally, you want to describe accessory use limitations?
The limit on the temporary use is 800 square feet.
Okay, but what if you put in a swimming pool? That's not temporary.
No, I'm sorry, that's for accessory boating.
I don't know what that means.
Bob, we've got a number and it's just the size to allow a swimming pool, but no larger. I want to say it's 800 square feet, but I have to look that up and get back to you. But we worked on a number to keep it small.
Okay, well, I think I agree, and I'm just pointing out that it may need to be an amendment to the legislation just so that we make it clear. It's the kind of thing that a lawyer's nose under the tent. And the next thing you know, you're sleeping with him or her.
And the answer to your other question, from the standpoint of what the task force has done, there would certainly be no inconsistency if the commission wants specific language about public access with restaurants.
Good. I'll do some thinking about that, and I might propose it at the next hearing so that we have some formal language. I think it's the beginning. I really think it's the beginning, and I may come up with something on gates and fences too. Once again, appropriate, not 24/7. I would like to get some idea, maybe Mr. Lashinsky could report next time as to what state this water access plan is, who's going to fund it, who's going to do it, when do we expect to see it?
And Bob, if you look at the document I sent just right before the meeting, it has an appendix added to it that what you had before did not have, and that shows images of every water public access point in the city.
Well, I've seen that map several times.
No,
this is actual pictures of each location and some suggestions for how to improve each location.
Good. I'll take a look at the appendix and we'll deal with that next time. Great,
So
thanks.
Bob, I misspoke. I meant to say transient boater services. So services for transient boaters that are just stopping by and visiting. That is what the 800 square feet limit applies to.
Well, but a swimming pool is
And
not that.
Bob, I just got a text. People are listening to us. Accessory uses are limited to 25% of the total area.
And is that what you mean by complimentary? Is that what you mean? Is that?
Yeah, complimentary is put under the category of accessory to limit it.
So it's limited to 25% of the total floor area of the lot? Right? Of the
I believe that's correct.
Okay, 25%. Okay. And just, I guess finally, and I'll relinquish my little, my little soapbox here. I want to make very clear that in WME, that any restaurant is limited to a 2,000 square foot restaurant?
Correct. Subject to conditional use.
Subject to a conditional use in that it has to benefit the neighborhood and satisfy the various factors before the Board of Appeals?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, and once again, if I could end on a much more complimentary note, I know I can sometimes be blunt. It's really a very good job that was done here. And I really, I was very happy and proud in a sense to be able to have taken a part in it. And I really want to hand it to everybody who presented and was engaged in these things. And I met some people I, hope to meet again, socially and informally. Thanks.
Any other commissioners want to comment? And we are going to continue this after we get some public hearing.
I do have a question about, and I think this pertains primarily to the WMM zone. And so it's more kind of a philosophical question. And, if we don't want to go, I'm not asking for any changes, it's just more for my curiosity about this. But it has to do with the delicate balancing between property values, taxes, and possible rents. So I think it's most applicable in this WMM zone where there maybe is not a lot of demand for office space, as was mentioned, because anybody with a cell phone can be a yacht broker kind of thing. But some of the restrictive zoning, would the low cost model actually work? So, for example, if the taxes were much lower, which would allow you to charge lower rents and perhaps entice smaller businesses that could afford a smaller rent. I'm thinking of that sort of low cost model versus property values rising, requiring you to charge higher rents, to et cetera. Realizing there are consequences of that with respect to revenue for the city and that kind of thing. But if we want to have restrictive zoning to promote certain kinds of businesses, we have to accept the consequences of that zoning, which might be less revenue if we're really trying to have these, especially smaller, less wealthy kinds of businesses. So I'm just curious if from a business model standpoint, whether that actually works, or the business models really kind of gets pushed towards the higher end is the only thing that's viable.
Is Rod on the phone? Rod, I think
Yeah.
that'd be a good question for you to respond to.
Sure. Can you hear me? That's a great question, and it's one that has gone around and around and around. This idea of, if the city of Annapolis wants to embrace our brand and our message of maritime industry and the preservation of the districts and the industry, and restrict our ability to bring in non-maritime tenants, then shouldn't they be a partner with us in reducing our tax structure to the point that it allows the property owners to encourage the lower cost rents. Carty Templeton did a big demonstration to the council a couple of weeks ago that really dove into the details of that. And yes, it would be one more way to offset the incredible expenses associated with being in a maritime property while being restricted. So it's a great idea, and it's one that Will Scott and I have talked a lot about. And the problem is, I don't know that there's a big appetite to take that on in times that we're all struggling and scratching for the last available nickel and dime to put together the city budget. So it has never gained any traction, but the concept is real and it works.
And additionally, there's the incentive for a property owner who, may just be a property owner and doesn't really have any skin in the maritime game. They may not be willing, and I'm just speculating here, but they may not be willing to allow the value of the building because that might be their retirement estate kind of thing. So
I didn't.
There's all these other incentives, and so I'm just curious about that.
No, it's a great idea and a great concept, but we haven't been able to get any traction, and it's one that's gone back when I was the president of the Marine Trades Group with Susan Zellers years ago. That was a topic that's been discussed all the way back till then, but it's very complicated to execute. And I think with the various challenges, it's just not gained a lot of traction without the support of the Planning Commission and the council and others. So we've been, charging along as best we can.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. And I just have one other question about. There's very little mention about anything about the WMC, and I'm just speculating that any changes in the WMC were probably not an area of consensus. Is that sort of an accurate assessment? And that's why we don't really see anything, especially given all of the discussion in the past years about 110 Compromise Street. I guess I sort of thought we might see more about that, but I'm speculating that that was sort of an area that couldn't reach any consensus.
No, that was not the issue. The issue was that WMC, with the changes that were made a few years back, I think it's 3 or 4 years now, has a 60% non-maritime because it's basically a kind of a commercial district. And what was put in at that time was the requirement for a public promenade. The city dock, of course, focused on the WMC and has very, very clear design drawings as to what is expected in that district. So there was all of the work in the city dock, creating the gateway. There was a maritime committee on the city dock, Terry Lomax, Susan, Gary Jobson, a whole variety of people. And they have a lot of very specific recommendations. So the feeling was, since city dock had just been addressed, that it was not discussed with this group.
Okay, so just to summarize, it's going to be, part of it's in a sense done, and part of it's going to be handled in a different forum. That's the way to take that. Okay, thanks.
Any other commissioners? Okay, thank you, Ms. Fogarty. And don't take this as an insult, but I felt the briefing was almost repetitive to me because it's been so well briefed to us over 4 times. So I felt primed. I knew the information already. And this is a good venue for you to do it again for the public, because this is the official, you want our support for 25 point. I get it. So wonderful job. Thanks, everyone. And great presentations that furthered all the work you've already done. So now I'm going to move on to the public comments and present. Let's hopefully we can get these correct in a second here.
Hey, Ben, I have a quick question before we move on to public comments.
Go right ahead, I'll set it up. Go right ahead.
Okay, I just have a question. Is there anyone that can tell me who it is that would like me to recuse myself?
That was legal.
But somebody had to ask for it. So as the person being asked to recuse, I guess it's my right to ask who wants me to be recused. Is Chris still on?
Do you recommend it, Mr. Beard? If you recommend it, then as the chair, I can ask for it for you. I mean, because
Yeah,
we're taking your advisement.
I made it as an advisory request.
Based on somebody who pointed something out to you, but can you tell me who that is? I'm just curious.
I can say it just came within legal and it was a good inquiry. It's probably a good practice. So I asked everyone the same question and that led to the inquiry that you raised since you said you owned rental property. So with that in mind, I thought we came to a resolution. You would.
No, we did. I just curious, like, did legal have somebody ask a question about me or, how did that come about?
Dr. Nash asked that if you owned a property in WM, because she was aware that you did. In her mind, you acknowledged that, and therefore that triggered Mr. Beard to give his legal opinion. And I believe I asked as well as others for that opinion.
No, I agree. No, you're missing, I guess you're missing the point. I'm just trying to figure out.
The answer is I don't have any more information to.
Got it.
Okay.
That's all I want to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody else who triggered that request from legal. Mr. Beard, was there anyone else that requested through legal other than us in this conversation today with Dr. Nash's notation of property ownership?
Just within legal circles. And I will just say that I own the question. We have this experience where it's become an issue for me to actively participate to avoid conflicts. And that's just what I've done.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Beard. That's what we hired you for, I presume. So thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Help us help ourselves, right? Okay, we'll move on to the public comments section, and I will show. Now I'll ask of staff. I received that group email from Dr. Nash of all of the public comments, and I believe it was about 8 in total. Dr. Nash, was there any others other than that grouping in that email for 025?
No, there was not.
Okay, and with that noted, Mr. Scott, you might be a little not happy with this comment, but my summation after reading all of those emails, all of those emailed submissions is they are all in favor of the 025 with the slight recommendation of a little further up in-depth review on some of the incentives. So no negative comments within the comments that we have received. And also every one of them wanted to present live testimony. And if they can't do it now, they can certainly do it at the next meeting. But whoever we have now, can we go ahead and get those online and have them present their live testimony, staff?
Mr. Chairman, may I make a brief response?
Go ahead, Mr. Scott.
I think that public testimony is always welcome and should be welcome in every one of our commissions and boards who conduct public business. And if I was off base in misrepresenting anyone, I apologize for that.
No, you just brought up that there was a bunch of negative comments we should expect, but we haven't
No,
seen
I was only referring to one.
Only to one? Okay, must have been a heck of a one. Okay, well, maybe they'll make a comment. And I would hope to see that comment. So whoever it was, maybe prime them and let's get that comment in. But thanks, Mr. Scott. And over to staff, do you have anyone for live testimony? And tune them in.
Yeah, we can start with Joe Devlin.
Mr. Devlin of ACM.
Hey,
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And please keep it to roughly 3 minutes and efficient, please.
Very good. I'll do my best. A lot of what is relevant has been touched on by the speakers from the task force. But my name is Joe Devlin with the law firm of Counsel Barrett L. Cosmer and Nolan, and I am representative on behalf of Annapolis City Marina, which has been touched on a number of times. I would like to, on behalf of Annapolis City Marina, commend Ms. Fogarty and the Maritime Task Force for the work that they have done. When this all started out, it was a whole lot of information, a whole lot of issues to be addressed. And I think that Ms. Fogarty and the work that everybody did to try to find areas of consensus was significant and has resulted in the pending legislation. And we support it. I believe that it does provide an appropriate balance in terms of triggers and incentives for the most part. And again, enhancing the maritime characteristics of the 4 zones. The one thing that I know Mr. Jabin touched on, I think it's significant, is, again, the districts are all different. Annapolis City Marina is in the WMM. WMM is a different maritime character than, for example, Edgewood Road, Back Creek, the WMI over there. And so we have an office building at Annapolis City Marina, significant office building, and we are losing 30,000 square feet of maritime space here very shortly. The lease has been terminated. That is upcoming. And so we're looking at ways to do that. And the maritime office availability and maritime office component is minimal at best. We've had 3,500 square feet on the market for almost a year with no real interest at all from maritime tenants. And again, coming out of the pandemic, the whole office scenario is in flux, and will be interesting to see how that goes. So we're looking for enhanced flexibility. The legislation does provide that, but we're asking that the incentive program be enhanced, be re-examined. For example, we have a fuel dock. That is a very significant asset to the city of Annapolis. The fuel dock costs significant funds to operate it, and we are in the process of having to replace the tanks, et cetera. So the ability to have more professional office, and again, Annapolis City Marina is all about professional office. We're not talking about non-maritime generally. So the ability to have more maritime office is important to us. Obviously, so that we can lease our building, keep it leased as we have for so long, so that we can, again, maintain those maritime characteristics, and especially the fuel dock, which is so integral and important to the citizens of Annapolis and our maritime character, et cetera. The one thing I'd like to touch on is the fact that, again, we've got this parking incentive. I think it's questions come up on that. And parking spaces are critical. And in the WMM especially, where we've got restaurants around, et cetera, the ability to provide 50 spaces for restaurant workers in return for more professional office, i.e. more ability to lease our buildings, is integral. We don't believe it impacts the character of the maritime zone, the character of our property at all in terms of who's in the building. And that's something that we think is important. And we really don't want that all this work that's been done and putting together this incentive package, that the parking is one that we think is extremely valuable for the community, for the residents. And to put that at a 5% increase does not seem to equate. And we'd like that you all to take a look at that in terms of, again, because the WMM is different. We have a lot of office building space, as well as all the other features that we have, Ms. Templeton has, Yacht Haven has, et cetera. But the enhancement of the incentive program, we think, is something that should be examined to make sure that those incentives are actually taken advantage of, because we do think that the work of the task force in putting together the program of triggers and incentives is essential, and would ask that be re-examined. We think, again, that 10% for the parking, 10% for the 125,000 for the public improvement, and 10% for the other tier 1 incentives seems to make sense. We'd ask you to take a look at that. Thank you.
Okay, any questions?
Mr. Devlin?
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Devlin, under the program as proposed, what percentage would your client's non-maritime use rise to?
Well, again, one thing I like to distinguish in is that when we talk about non-maritime, we're really only talking about professional office and retail sale of goods. Restaurants are sort of its own category. But what we're talking about is that if we did incentives, we would hit the 50% automatically. And we believe that we would like to get to 55 or 60% of professional office in our existing office buildings if we provide the incentives that we're talking about in terms of, again, the parking. We think is a very important beneficial interest. So for us, this law the ordinance as drafted would limit us to an additional 5% to get us to 50%. And we think that that a better economic development way to go that also provides significant benefits to the public is to increase that, whether, again, you take that tier 1 incentive and bump it up to 10%, et cetera. But that's the concept that we're looking at in terms of, again, because we're only talking about existing office buildings, professional office. It's a very limited measure. And again, I think, as Mr. Javen said, that's
how many spaces, how many parking spaces are available on that property?
Available for public use?
How many are there?
There are, I think off the top of my head, I think it's about 250 spaces.
Okay. How
And we
many,
have some on a top deck, some on a bottom deck.
how many are on the top deck and how many are below?
I honestly don't know the breakdown. Let's call it 150 and 200. But we
Okay.
already provide access to the parking deck on top. And what we have done, what Mr. Gill has done, Mackenzie has done, the owner, is when the pandemic has hit and the restaurants, local restaurants were needing to put tents up and use outdoor seating, he voluntarily provided passes to restaurant employees, several of the restaurants, to take that burden off of them, because once those tents come up, not only are they taking their own parking spaces, but it also then puts more pressure on the community. So
How many,
you know,
how many parking spaces did he provide to restaurant workers?
I believe he's provided approximately, it could be as high as 75. That's why the 50 in terms of mandating that as a permanent fixture. You know, we're fine with that.
So you think that there are 200 spaces below deck?
I'm not sure exactly. As I said, there's about 350 spaces there. So whatever it is, that's where we provide the parking at this point, and where we would envision providing the parking per this ordinance, because that is secured.
And you all, part of this legislation, excuse me, but part of this legislation also reduces your required parking. So there was actually more parking that was built than was necessary, or then parking.
Well, what happens actually is that when, if we get increased
requirement that you provide more parking spaces than what we require from office buildings now. Is that the way, is that correct?
Well, not really. We have the same physical number of spaces. The problem is that if we were stuck with the old calculation, when we increase the professional office, our parking requirement would go up.
So, but with shared parking, you only are providing, making available to the public parking spaces on weeknights and weekends?
That's correct.
And there's a whole process for you to go through to see that through, is that correct?
What do you mean, process to see that?
Well, there's a
through?
process. I mean, it's like the planning and zoning department has seen through some of these shared parking arrangements and has, you know, I don't know if they changed the design guidelines, but they've worked with property owners so that shared parking can become a reality.
Right. We certainly have the ability.
It's not like you would be breaking new ground here.
No.
Spaces available on weeknights and weekends?
The parking would be available on weeknights and weekends.
Okay.
Per the statute, and that's
Right.
something we can easily do because of, again, we have office tenants that primarily are there during the week, during
Exactly.
the daylight hours.
And so below deck, not even counting up on top, which is primarily for Carroll's Creek Cafe customers, but below deck, you have something in the neighborhood of 175 to 200 spaces?
Somewhere in the neighborhood, it's 150. I'd have to go back to the math in terms
Okay,
of
good.
Exactly how many spaces.
All right.
there,
Are
but
any
yes,
of those
it's a significant
allocated to
number.
people? Are any of those allocated to people who have slips there?
I do not know the answer to that question.
Perhaps we could learn that.
Sure.
What about the public coming in and wanting to pay for parking or use those spaces when
Right.
at nighttime?
That is available on the top deck.
Why is it unavailable on the bottom deck?
Well, because to this point, it's not been something that was examined. And the bottom deck is, again, now you're getting into what is also an unmanned gated entrance, and it is under the building. So there's some security issues there, et cetera. But
Okay.
certainly the program has worked to this point with the restaurant people in the pandemic era.
Okay. But it's of great value to your client to see the maximum amount of non-maritime professional office rental space, correct?
There certainly is value to us to be able to fill that 30,000 square foot of maritime we're losing with non-maritime. And that's what we're suggesting. We're suggesting that increasing that incentive would make it more of an incentive. And if that requires some additional, components, that's fine. But
Yeah, well,
we're just saying that the parking we think is significant.
It might behoove your client to come forward with a proposal that says, this is how I'm going to really provide a lot of parking to relieve the parking pressures in Eastport.
Well, again,
In return for that, then who knows where this will go? But it's a
Understand.
proposal that perhaps should be made. I would be interested in hearing that. I'd like to know how many spaces there are, what would be involved in changing it to a some sort of a situation where people can pay to park there, a nominal fee. You know,
Sure.
not $30, but
We'll certainly put
with
that
a
together
nominal
and get back to you.
The other thing that is useful for the tour operators that are around there, people who go on the tours on the pirate boats and the paddle boards and so forth, they need a place to park on the weekends primarily. And so you may make coupons available to these folks so that it's part of their rental fees at these other places that folks would be able to get a parking space on a Saturday or a Sunday. All I'm saying is that it's time for like a real proposal. And
That's fine. We're trying to deal with the task force report and the legislation. And yes, we have proposed that we enhance the incentives, and you're saying, okay, well, we're willing to look at enhancing them, but we need more detail, and that's fine. That's fair.
Thank you.
Mr. Devlin, this is the chairman. How do you feel that you and your clients' incorporation into the task force and your concerns that you're venting here were handled, and were they mentioned in due time to be accommodated appropriately, or was it just something that the task force overall couldn't get to a conclusion with you yet?
Well, I think this is part of the work that was done is significant in terms of reaching consensus on a number of different issues. This was an issue in terms of, can you go, for example, with professional office specifically, because we mix up the term of non-maritime, but there has certainly been plenty of reports that have indicated that the task force has been anywhere from 45 to 60%. What they were able to get consensus on in terms of additional professional office or non-maritime retail was at 50. So we certainly believe that we have had our opportunity to talk about that, but you have a distinction that we're seeking to draw between gaining consensus to be able to move something forward and then getting in the legislative process where bodies such as yourselves and the city council and the mayor have an opportunity to sort of rise above the fray and take another look at it. So yes, the issue was addressed by the task force, but they came out with what they came out with to gain consensus. We just believe that it's deserving of further review because it was a topic that was a subject of considerable discussion.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other commissioners? Okay, and I have a quick question for Eileen. There you go. Is there going to be any further deliberations or looking at this by the task force, or it is what it is in 025 as suggested at the current percentage?
We will, whatever the planning commission directs us to do, we will certainly do.
Okay, so it is what it is at the moment until further notice.
Yes,
All
there
right.
was, as we mentioned, there was very, very strong position on the part of the industry and the residents that they definitely did not want to see 60%. There was discussion with the incentives between 50 and 55, and the task force came down on the side that it was a maritime zone and that it shouldn't go above 50.
Okay, yet at the same time, we hear a lot of the maritime industries going to cell phone and not wanting an office. And I hear arguments that they can't fill spaces. So I'm hearing both stories evident in the conversation all day today. Okay, any other, since we have a lot to cover, any other commissioners' questions of Mr. I'm sorry, I'm looking, Devlin? Okay, Mr. Devlin, thank you very much. And you will have a chance again to speak at the next meeting if so required, and submittal can be done. Thank you very much. On to the next person for public testimony.
Next, we have Terrence Lomax.
Good evening. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Terry Lomax. I'm an attorney here in Annapolis, but unlike Mr. Devlin, I do not have a client in this endeavor. I had previously submitted written comments, which I assume may get put up here shortly, and I certainly am not going to read those, but I do ask that the commission read those. let me start with, I was extremely impressed with the depth of the analysis by Eileen, Rod, Susan, Mike, Eric, and Will, all of whom I've known and have worked with over the years at a number of capacities. But I actually kind of come here wearing two hats. My wife and I are Eastport residents. We've lived here since 1978, and we've been boaters on the Chesapeake and offshore before we even met. But we are not property owners. We live on Chesapeake at the corner of Burnside and Chesapeake. We enjoy Eastport, we enjoy the city of Annapolis, and we enjoy the ability to get to the waterfront. Ironically, there are something like 29 points of access already in the city. And while I know many people feel that there's not enough access, I also think that there has been much more access in this city than might otherwise happen in other communities. But also, I'm a member of the Maritime Advisory Board, and I've chaired that board. I've been a member since 1988, and I think Will Scott and I probably parallel in the number of years that we have been members of either the commission or the Maritime Advisory Board when this WM zoning has been in effect. But I also served on the 98 and the 2008 comprehensive plan committees, and I was currently on the Maritime Task Force. And I bring that up because while I'm not here to comment on the specific provisions of O2521, this process is one that has been a mission of the Maritime Advisory Board for the last 25 years. And this legislation is going to come to the Maritime Advisory Board in our August meeting. And so I don't want to presuppose for our members what recommendations we may make out of this. But what I really want to do is just provide a little bit of frame of reference as a member of the task force, and then also wearing my MAB hat as to how we got here. I think it was significant that the first slide, the first item on the first slide, pointed out that this maritime zoning is 34 years old, and it has not had any meaningful review. And one of the aspects of that zoning is that WMM has always enjoyed 30% non-maritime use. Annapolis City Marina is a business plan development, which did not even fall under the WMM zoning. WME, 4 blocks away, had 0 non-maritime use for 34 years. WMI, with the most property in terms of square footage, had 0 non-maritime use and had 0 restaurants. And what is noticeable is that when the current zones were adopted back in 1987, the industry was a remarkably different industry than we see today. It was commercial, and it had a recreational component, but it was primarily a commercial industry. And the zoning that was put in place at that time was supporting that commercial aspect primarily, and less focused on supporting the recreational aspect of the maritime industry. Fast forward 34 years, and what do we have? As Rod Yard, I think, would probably be a prime example. We are a recreational industry with a commercial component that is heavily regulated and increasingly regulated by EPA and others. And we've seen a surge in paddlecraft, which we did not see 5 or 10 years ago, which adds yet another element to the industry, but also adds another element of need for support of that aspect of the industry. And whether that's with water access, whether that's with storage facilities in boat yards, it is a different industry today than we had 34 years ago. What it also means is that the businesses that existed 34 years ago, and for which there were triggers and for which there were accessory uses that supported those industries have changed. And a simple example is if you look at Chesapeake Harbor, which is in the county, Chesapeake Harbor is a major marina with some very significant sized boats. And what do they have? They have a restaurant. They have a swimming pool. Those are the kinds of facilities that transient boaters like to have and need in order to support the maritime industry in a recreational mode. And what we have to look at now is what are those kinds of things that will support the maritime industry without supplanting the maritime industry. 25 years ago, the Maritime Advisory Board started to recognize that we needed these changes. And in the 2008
time, please. We need to expedite this. Thank you.
I'm sorry?
Time, we like to limit these to 3 minutes, please. And we've got another thing we're gonna have to hear after this. So if you could expedite.
Understand. I didn't think I was near 3 minutes, but okay. The MAB recognized those changes, and we've advocated for 25 years to make those changes. And thanks to Mayor Buckley, Dr. Nash, planning staff, Alderman Arnett, we've gotten there. And what has been unique about this process is that maritime property owners, maritime businesses, and the adjoining residential neighbors all have been a part of this process. And Eileen's task force, I say Eileen's task force, the task force has sought to engage the stakeholders. They've tried to reach and have reached consensus with those stakeholders. And the current consensus was achieved through a lot of meetings, a lot of spirited discussions. And 2521 has evolved. And I'm not naive enough to think that, as even been discussed tonight, that it is a perfect piece of legislation. And that this commission or members of the MAB, when it comes to the board that I chair, will not make some recommendations. But I just want to leave two thoughts. It is the process of consensus. And frankly, the most important part of this legislation in my mind is that there's a provision for an annual report monitoring of the success of this legislation and a process for future review that doesn't take another 34 years. And that's probably more important than anything else, that we are able to adapt less than 34 years out. It was not an arbitrary process. Frankly, it was a hard-fought process, and I'm happy to answer any questions so long as I don't have to opine as to what the MAB might want to do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lomax, for your comments. Ms. Fogarty, we've run out of time for any further public comment for this item tonight on the agenda, because we do have to move on to another one where we have a lot of people waiting. So what we're going to do,
Does
Commissioners.
that mean that all the people, the other people who've been waiting will not get to speak?
That's about what that's about to mean. I got to talk to my other commissioners here, but Miss Jackie Rouse, are you online? Hopefully she can unmute herself. The rest of the commissioners, we have to go into a work session. We have a bunch of representation for the Hillman Garage. Dr. Nash, can you confirm that they are still online and waiting for the Hillman Garage?
Yes, they're online waiting.
Okay, and we promised to get to that tonight, and I think it's wise. So to my fellow commissioners, we are in the middle of the public hearing for the Maritime Task Force's legislation 02521. And we will continue that to August 5th, where we continue all the public comments to no problem. And I would like to have us go ahead and close out for that item tonight and continue it and go ahead and get to the Hillman parking garage. Because if we don't, we're going to run up to 10 o'clock or maybe of thereabouts if we don't go ahead and get Hillman Garage going. And we do have a bunch of staff that have been waiting for 2 meetings in a row on that. So any other commissioners' comments?
Ben, we can do the continuation of this hearing first on the agenda at the next meeting. So, we all apologize, but because the last meeting was canceled, the work session on the Hillman Garage did get postponed. And
Absolutely. Any other commissioners with comment?
Your call.
Okay, and going with that, thank you. Sorry to the rest of the people that are online to comment for the 02521, but we will push you to the next meeting and we will continue 02521 as previously briefed to the August 5th meeting, and hopes that we get some more information there from the public comment. And everything looks pretty positive in the short term right now. So thank you for everyone that briefed the Maritime Board, and we're to the 2-hour mark on that. And we will move aside that item and proceed down the agenda. Thank you, Ms. Fogarty, and we'll look forward to hearing from all of you. If you'd like again at the next meeting, please submit applications for any of those who've already talked. And moving on the agenda to, hold on a second here, let me present that.
Ben, you're going to have to close the meeting before we go into work session, if that's what you're going to do next.
Yeah, hopefully when everyone can see the agenda, we've gone through R2NC 02112 and ordinance 02521. Both of those items are continued to August 5th meeting. We also have the draft rules of procedure. That public hearing is continued from June 17th. However, due to time, I believe we're gonna have to push that one and postpone that to the next meeting for that public hearing. Before we do, staff, did you have any other comments from the public with regards to the draft rules of procedure in the last month?
No, we did not receive any.
Actually,
Okay.
can we actually do that now, Ben? Because it may be important for my even being on the, to be able to participate at all.
I'd rather not. I'd rather go right to the work session because we have a lot more people waiting on that. And I firmly believe that the draft rules of procedure, hearing what we've heard tonight, we can actually add some more meat to that discussion for the next time. We don't have to approve it the next time. We can still talk about it, keep making it better and better. So
You know what, but I
personally-
won't be able to participate if we're not doing something soon. And I may as well step off the planning commission if I can't participate anymore, which then puts you guys in a bind because you won't have quorum, which I don't want to do.
I don't see how that's the case, but any other commissioners, I personally would like to continue the draft rules of procedure to the next meeting. Any other commissioners? Comments?
I might make a suggestion, Diane, that there can be some additional language to this that might address some of the issues tonight, and I don't see it addressed. So I think you and I and other members on that subcommittee ought to address it in the meantime.
Okay.
Okay.
And that's what I'm looking forward to. And Diane, do you really feel that if we don't pass this tonight, that you're not going to be able to participate in the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case. It's okay. That's okay. I may, you know what, yeah. We'll talk.
And you
offline.
can always reconvene the meeting after the work session if you all want to then discuss the rules of procedure, but it's, there are a lot of people from the public also watching the hearing to see the Hillman Garage presentation. So
Yeah,
it would
that's
be my
fine.
suggestion that if you want to discuss that, you close the meeting, do the work session, and then reopen the meeting.
If we end at a decent time, I'd be in favor of that.
Say that again, Bob, I missed it.
If we finish the garage at a decent time, I'd be in favor. I personally would, for one, would be in favor of that.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of that too. I'm just having trouble seeing why she wouldn't be able to participate in the next meeting. But being that would be the case and Diane stating it's an emergency, how about, I'm agreeing with Bob. We'll work a little late tonight. So let's go ahead and punt to the work session, and that's going to be the plan. And we'll bring up draft rules of procedure and Diane's issue. Diane, you comfortable with that?
Yep, that sounds good.
All right, good. Any other commissioners? Now, on that note, I would like to move that we adjourn the meeting and have the work session and then come back to re-adjourn the meeting and do the draft rules of procedure. That's my motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay, this meeting is now adjourned. We are going to stay on YouTube and move to the work session. And staff, please get the work session moving. Please check your mute, whoever's got the dogs.
All right, there's Tom. He was able, you're ready to go, Tom? Okay, great.
Yes.
You have a presentation as well, Tom.
Yeah, actually, the presentation is all you, Eileen. Commissioners should have received all the items via electronic email. And I'm just going to actually turn it over to Eileen and her team to give the presentation.
It sounds like a tambourine in the background for whoever's got that. Is that a dog? Thank you. Go ahead, Eileen.
Julian, can you pull up the presentation?
Yes, give me 1 second. Actually, thanks, Ben.
Thanks very much, Julian. Next slide, please. Well, good evening. Although we're in the middle of the evening, I think by right now, the City Dock, I was going to say the Maritime Task Force, I apologize. The City Dock team is very excited to be here to share with the Planning Commission the tremendous amount of progress that's underway for Hillman Garage. Ivan Doolin from AMRP, Bryce Turner from BCT Architects, Drew Lewis with Whiting Turner will be presenting to you this evening. But most importantly, we look forward to your feedback and to your direction. Next slide, please. I think we all know why we're here tonight, and that is the city is addressing through the City Dock and through this contract, two of the longest standing issues facing our downtown. The increasing flood risk from sea level rise, and the next slide depicts the situation with the dilapidated and really outdated Hillman Garage. So with that said, next slide, please. We are bringing forward to the city what will be a state-of-the-art garage in addition to a completely revitalized City Dock. Since January, AMRP has completed a feasibility analysis, and they did a very, very detailed analysis of looking at the assumptions and the revenues that were initially anticipated. They also did a comprehensive planning review and analysis, which we'll be sharing with the community shortly. At the same time, there have been a range of studies, geotechnical, archaeological surveys, boundaries that have all been underway. Next slide, please. The short version is that the city is on schedule. When you look at this chart, which we showed to the Planning Commission at the end of the City Dock process, we are, if you go 3 rows down to the orange or red row, we are in the middle of that row. The feasibility review has been completed. The design for Hillman Garage is underway. Financing options are evaluated, and the short version is the city is on schedule with the great work that you're going to hear about tonight from AMRP. Next slide, and Ivan.
Thank you. And first want to start and to say that we are very excited about, continue to be very excited about the project, both Hillman Garage and City Dock, and very happy about how the process is run and the excellent cooperation that we've had with the city through the process. Cognizant of time, we'll skip kind of run through some initial background and info, and then I'll hand it over to Bryce Turner from BCT to walk you through some of the features of the garage and some of the design work that has been underway so far this year. So if you skip to the next slide and the next one after that. One of the things that we were working hard at originally or early in the year was to look at the geometry and how to fit a garage most optimally within the constraints of the site and the various zoning regulations that are applicable to that site. Key among which is naturally with garage the height of the garage and the usage, how many spaces we're able to fit within it. There's, as some of you might remember from the presentation, the joint presentation we had to the Planning Commission and HPC earlier in the year, the proceeds from the financing of Hillman, or a portion of those proceeds, will be used to fund the City Dock project. So while Hillman Garage is a separate project from City Dock, they are very much linked. So we're trying to optimize the cost and revenue from the garage to enable more funds to be able to be brought to bear on the City Dock project. So that's a little bit about a little bit of the background. If we skip to the next slide, one of the things, as I mentioned, that we spent a substantial amount of time on together with the city staff is looking at the current Hillman Garage and the applicable height district limitations that are on the site. The site itself, you can see outlined in yellow in front of you, is the limits, is the parcel, which is a city-owned parcel that encompasses the current garage and City Hall, as well as Conduit Street and Main Street, in addition to Duke of Gloucester Street. Based on the height district limitations, as taken from the Duke of Gloucester Street side, is what you can see in red here, and the existing Hillman Garage fits naturally within that. If we skip to the next slide, just to show a overview of the proposed design for the new Hillman Garage, we have been able to fit the building envelope within that height district overlay, and that's been one of the key drivers for some of the design features and elements and work that we've been undertaking through this initial period, the beginning of the year. With that, I'll hand it over to Bryce and more competent hands to talk you through some of the other changes and design features that we've been working on. So, Bryce.
Thank you, Ivan, and hello to all of you on the commission. We appreciate the opportunity to be here in this work session and perhaps better prepare ourselves for the application. Many of you are somewhat familiar, obviously, with this design and the plan presentation that we've made to you previously. So we want to get to the meat of this, really, and we've tried to address some of the specific criteria that I know you use to evaluate site plans, and we want to be mindful of everyone's time. I just want to start off by saying that we recognize that it's not enough to simply replace the existing garage with a more attractive one. I think we realized that day one. We're working to incorporate the building into its environment harmoniously by incorporating compatible building materials, scaled openings, and an appropriate facade cadence that really fits within the historic fabric of downtown Annapolis. And it's quite a challenge. It's a large building footprint, but that's what we hope to do. The new Hillman parking facility, as you'll see, will be compatible with the adjacent uses, we think, and will certainly provide parking for adjacent government buildings and businesses, but will also include electric vehicle charging, solar PV panels,
we're proposing, bicycle parking, and even some wayfinding. So let's go to the, before we go to the next slide, actually, Ivan, the proposed parking garage minimizes and attempts to minimize certainly adverse impacts to the surrounding site because it is a slightly smaller footprint. It's not appreciably smaller, but it is somewhat smaller, as you'll see. We've been able to back off of Gorman Street by about 5 feet, increasing the streetscape opportunities on Gorman Street, which you'll see. We still have pedestrian flow around the building and even through the building, which we think is great. We've improved the stormwater management, and those planners along Gorman Street help us with that. And there are opportunities for some future adaptive reuse also, of course. Let's go to the next slide. So we've got plans here, which I want to get through most of the plans fairly quickly because they don't speak to a lot of the vertical design really, since it is similar to the existing footprint, but somewhat within it. But I do want to point out on this document, which is really the landscape plan, I'll call it, where we will have along Gorman Street 4 new trees and 2 very large planters. And those will also be part of the stormwater management plan. We'll get a sidewalk that's approximately 10 feet wide there, and that incorporates those planters as well. We think that's going to do a lot to activate Gorman Street, as well as some of the things we're doing in the vertical design that we'll share in a few minutes. Around the building, we will also be addressing and improving landscaping and improving the existing sidewalk situation, widening it wherever possible, certainly to provide better accessible routes to City Hall and to Duke of Gloucester Street from the garage. And we think that's important, and obviously that will be a vast improvement over the existing garage. Next slide, please. The ground level plan, which I really would just point out on this plan, the reason that we've been able to be more efficient with this parking structure is that we are using more economically efficient bay sizes. We've angled parking, but also we eliminated the speed ramp, which we call it, which was adjacent to Gorman Street that the existing garage had. And we now have a sloped floor, one center bay section of the building that slopes in a way that allows us to get from one level to the next. The stairs and elevators will be on the northeast and the northwest sides of the building, and will provide an opportunity really to get some solid enclosure in a couple of portions of the building and unique places where we happen to be close to existing neighbors. And by listening to some of the community input, we've realized that anything we can do to soften the noise or the glare of car headlights would be much appreciated. This garage is, however, an open garage structure, and that's necessary to avoid mechanical ventilation. So a vast majority of it, maybe 40 to 50%, must be open. Next slide, please. And this is the second tier plan. And if we go to the next slide, you'll also see the top level plan. Next slide. So we have almost a full 4.5 levels of parking structure here. At most recent count, I think we're 596 cars. That will fluctuate by a few cars one way or the other as we continue to develop the design. Next slide, please. So then for the design of the structure of the exterior, we've got a couple of aerial views here. This would only be seen from a drone really, but I think it helps to at least get our arms around the vertical design and planning of the structure in a way that's most easily understood. So this is, of course, the existing garage. I apologize for the resolution of the image from Google Earth. but you can see that speed ramp, which goes up and down on this end of the building on Gorman Street on the north side. And then the stairs that are located right on the corners of the building that have a lot of impact, I think, into the perception of this garage as being somewhat brutalist, perhaps. Next slide. And this is the proposed design that we're offering. And the team has attempted to really balance the function of the new facility and the public safety of the community with the aesthetics that we all desire for this new facility to fit harmoniously within its environment. Of course, the footprint, as I said, is large, and we've worked hard to develop a facade that features brick in a scaled and segmented fashion that's used in conjunction with kind of a vertical metal screen system, which you see there on the side of the building with the vertical element. And the underlying concrete structural frame, we are working hard to keep it simple and beautiful in our minds as a skeleton to this building, and something that can also be exposed along with that brick and metal screen system. So in some cases you do see a concrete spandrel panel, and in some cases you see it veiled by the screen, and in other cases you might get a hint of it through the brick facade piece. There will be some in the windows. There will be a concrete cast stone sill in the windows, and in some cases a small screen that will be used as our guardrail to protect for people who obviously not be able to follow the garage. There will not be windows in these openings, and the screen will not be throughout the entire opening. But we think that these window openings are scaled in a way that fits in with the Annapolis fabric. We think that breaking it up into several sections, as you've seen before, is done in a way that helps to reduce its impact. It makes it less of a monolithic structure, but one with the ability to have some porousness to it, which I think helps a lot. On the top of the garage, you'll see the PV solar panel array that really has been designed in a canopy fashion that we think will provide shading, obviously, for the cars on the top level. It'll provide power, of course, as well. Will generate, collect solar power, which we think is a real benefit and important use. It will reduce the heat island effect on that top level of concrete. And we're proposing here that we do lighting in a very small scale way through string lighting that will go from the edges of that solar panel to the to a system of poles on the exterior, and to downplay that exterior lighting as much as possible. You really don't see it in this image, and during the day you won't see it much at all, but it'll be a very soft light at night. It may even give us an opportunity to possibly reuse or to use the garage for some other events while it's still a parking garage in off hours. So let's, you also see here some sections of the facade that are solid. They are solid concrete and painted concrete, and they fall in some areas where we're closest to our adjoining neighbors, where quite frankly we need a fire separation, as well as the noise and glare that I mentioned before. So we think that's working out relatively well, keeping the building very simple in those locations on the east and west sides. Next image, please. This is without the solar canopy on top of the building, where we're no longer able to light under that canopy, and the proposal was that we actually would need, obviously, some pole lighting to get light down on that level for public safety. You know, I think I personally really like the canopy, obviously, and I think it provides a win-win in a lot of ways. Next image, please. But we want to show you that option, which I think we've spoken to some of you about. And viewing it from really the I guess the the northwest corner or northeast corner rather of the building, the before, the existing Hillman garage, and then the next image here is the same view from that angle. If we can advance the slide. And you see that we have relocated within the proposed design the stair and elevator tower, where we have to get stairs and elevators all the way to the top of the building. That ends up being the tallest function that has to occur in this building. And so that piece is now closer to Gorman Street, which we think really works better, more functionally for the community. If you're exiting to Main Street, for instance, it also helps to provide some solid mass, if you will, between the parking garage and those close existing neighbors on this east side. So again, you see the three major facade components here, as well as some of that streetscape at Gorman that we'll look at again in a few minutes. Next image, please. And then from Duke of Gloucester, looking down over City Hall, another imaginary view. Our next image for the proposed design. And you see that the access, we think the access is greatly improved from Duke of Gloucester Street with a more level on-grade entrance, if you will, as opposed to the one that currently slopes down. We've been tweaking the sidewalks leading from Duke of Gloucester to the building and getting an accessible route from the building to Duke of Gloucester Street, which we think is going to work. We're now considering that to be on the right-hand side of this entry drive. And then you see the brick element with the garage signage at the entrance and exit to the garage here, being the brick facade element that you'll see. The rest of the garage is not easily seen because of landscaping, obviously, and other structures, but even there we're using the metal screening device as well as some exposed concrete there, which we think has a very simple but elegant presentation. The solar canopy, you can see here as well, does not continue all the way to the edge of the building by any means, but covers that center bay of the parking. Next image, please. And then from Main Street, looking back towards Gorman and the parking structure. Next slide, please. And again, where you really, I think this is probably where many of us are going to perceive the garage as the public and from the public way more than any other place. And I think that the use of the brick and the openings and the proportions of the facade elements work very well with the existing fabric in downtown, especially given the size of this structure. Next slide. And then looking from Conduit Street down Gorman Street, the existing stair that unfortunately is rusting is in bad need of repair. The next slide. And where we're treating it in a more traditional building form composition, I feel, by turning the corner with this bird's mouth, if you will, brick facade piece. The stair that is in this stair tower on the right projects out, obviously, from that corner vehicular entrance and exit. And one of the things we did, and as I believe we discussed at the HPC meeting even, was we considered using at these tallest elements, as we brought the stair towers and the elevator as well on the other end of the building towards Gorman, we considered the use of a lighter material, actually concrete, at the top. So the building actually sits back just a little bit at that top level and has a lighter color, which really has a much less significant impact on the daytime skyline of the building. And I think it's helpful, and we'll share that in some other images in a minute. But we've done that with the stair towers and the elevator tower. Next image, please. And then from Duke of Gloucester on the grade entrance. Next image, please. And as I mentioned, we're now modifying the sidewalk a little bit. We're really looking to get a more robust sidewalk on the right-hand side that will give us the access we need, thinking that it may only need to be potentially on the one side, or at least a wider sidewalk on the right-hand side, and still get a significant entrance drive into and out of the garage. Next slide. And as you notice, you really don't see the solar canopy, from the public way in that image. And then looking on the west side of the building here, closest to Conduit Street, where we have some relatively large structures there, 162 Conduit, and we're obviously making this and working to keep this as simple as possible. And by reusing the existing sidewalk location, even though we do hope to put in a new slightly wider sidewalk to make it a little bit better, but you can see the existing landscaping there that we've kept for the purposes of orientation, really, as much as anything. I'm sure we'll have new landscaping generally here. Next image. And then again, along Gorman Street, the existing, and the next image, please, with the new facade and what we believe is a really significant activation of Gorman Street with 4 new trees, specimen trees there. We have a canopy type feature above some of the open bays here to the garage. There'll be bollards that will keep cars in and other cars out. And we think it is an opportunity to have some temporary pop-up events happening within that space, as you'll see in this next slide. But looking at the building obliquely, this is really the way we experience this building. The depth of the brick is important to us, to have a return of the brick some 2 feet or so, as you can see there in the window frames, and especially as it wraps columns in some places, and then the vertical metal screening that is veiled on top of the concrete structure. And so I think this facade will work out well. Next image, please. And then this is really meant to show an example of a temporary pop-up market happening within that first bay of the structure on Gorman Street, where it would not be difficult at all for someone to set up mobile food trucks or art trucks or flower trucks or tabletop vendors within that space. And we think it's a great opportunity because of the garage is not utilized as much as it could be many months of the year and weekends, and as well in the future when we may have more opportunity here to reduce the need for parking in this bay. This bay of parking the parking can be taken out, for instance, as it is shown here, and the functionality of the garage remains the same due to the ramping and the circulation pattern that we have proposed. Next slide. And then we did a couple of long view studies, as was discussed with HPC, about the impact of the garage from other views. This is from City Dock, obviously looking really to the northwest, I guess, or to the west. And the parking garage is kind of right below the flag. And you'll see in this next image, if you want to proceed, where you'll see just the very top edge of the spandrel in that location. And the lighter color material, we think is really beneficial to make that impact as little as possible on the historic fabric of downtown. And then one other image on the next one here, looking more or less from the state capitol. You can see the existing top level of the Hillman Garage. Below the arrow, there are cars sitting there. You can see some of the vertical fins of the existing structure. And then with the new proposed garage in the next image, please, where we start to see obviously a bit more of the top of the garage, but we've screened the cars, screened the lights, of course, behind more significant facade elements there. Next image, please. We have the next couple of slides are the elevations of the buildings. Probably not too much to get into, but if you want to please proceed to the next slide. You know, looking from Gorman Street, you'll never really perceive the building this way, but you know, this is a relatively long structure, 240 feet, approximately about 170 feet deep. And but it's important for us, especially architecturally, just to understand our systems and the rhythm and the proportions, to obviously study it in elevation. The lowest level of the garage is approximately 11 feet, and then the upper levels are 10 feet each. And so if we go to the next slide, we can go through these fairly quickly. We have openness requirements around the building. So we have some existing areaways around the existing building that we want to maintain and reuse some of the existing retaining wall locations for ease of construction and cost, obviously, and impact on the surrounding environment. Next slide. This would be the east elevation, as we call it, looking towards the west, with the entrance to the parking on the right-hand side within that brick structure and the elevator and stair enclosure. Next slide. And then lastly, I think this is the west elevation with, again, the entrance exit to the garage on Gorman Street on the left. And you can see the solar canopy above, which is set back, you know, some 40 feet from the edge of the parking structure spandrel. But for the purposes of an elevation drawing, of course, we need to know where that is in terms of height. We've also shown here in dashed lines the existing structures on Conduit Street in this case. So in each of these cases, we've looked at where the existing structure is and try to understand a little bit of the rhythm of the existing built environment there. So on the left, you can just make out the chimney feature and gabled end of the building at the corner of Gorman and Conduit, and then the larger structure, which is next to it, that the roof ridge is actually quite high, higher than our garage. You can see dashed in there between column lines B and C, and in a similar fashion between column lines C and D. So in some ways, you know, we're not completely out of scale by any means with the neighborhood, and I think we reflect some of the, you know, the interest and the modulation of the existing facades that are around and typical of a historic neighborhood. Next slide. And this is a section view, and I think everyone's familiar with the heights, which Ivan touched on briefly. We're in that 28 and 38 height restricted district from Duke of Gloucester Street. Everything is measured, that being our front door and front yard. And the solar canopy fits within that, as well as the stair and elevator tower, all within that 38 feet from Duke of Gloucester Street. Okay, next. I think that's one other view from the other side in terms of a section view. Next slide. And then the facade materials, which we've been looking at for some time. Next slide. You can get the feel of the character that we're looking at here, which is the predominant brick material, of course, that we'll be using throughout those facade elements, but that will be complemented by the precast sills that would be in the bottom of the windows in a few locations, which is kind of almost an oyster color, just off-white. And then there will be exposed concrete structure that we're looking to find a nice way to whitewash or have an admixture that will give us the best kind of quality of color in the concrete. The metal screening system, which is a metal system, something like Longboard, which is a proprietary name that we're considering. And then there'll be some metal mesh, as you see on the right, which will be in the lower portions of some of the window openings to protect those openings as a guardrail. Next slide, and I think that's it. Okay, and we've got some action committee process updates. Eileen, are you going to address these or?
Yeah, I'll be very, very brief. Next slide, please. So I wanted the Planning Commission to be aware because it's very interesting, and I know some of you are particularly interested in what is going to happen to that public space. There is a new task force team, the legacy team, Experiencing City Dock. Chris Haley is the co-chair, and that group is looking at ways to tell the very complex history that is Annapolis and to define the direction for the public space. Next slide, please. There are a whole variety of ways that public space can tell a story, engraved, whether it's the ground graphics, signage, memorial installations, and this will all be part of the work of the City Dock Action Legacy team. Next slide, please. The task force has had a multifaceted outreach. Just since January, there have been 15 work sessions with the residential community, the business community, the City Dock Action Committee, one with the Planning Commission in February, stakeholder visits on site so people can get a sense, both residents and businesses, of how the garage will be constructed and how that impacts them. And just ongoing engagement through both technology solutions, which will hopefully take place in the fall in terms of parking apps, as well as the website. Next slide, please. There are 3 phases of development and hence 3 phases of outreach to the community. The first we're in right now, the pre-development phase. This is the planning and design of Hillman and the interim parking strategy. This will take place through December. Next slide, please. The next phase is the planning for the City Dock and the design for City Dock, as well as the comprehensive parking and mobility strategy starting this summer through September 22. And the last is the construction phase, which will start this winter through February 2024. So there's lots of opportunity for people to be involved, to be heard, and lots of opportunity for us to be working directly with the Planning Commission. Next slide, please. Oh, there's not a next slide. There you go. Thank you very much.
So that concludes our presentation.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, questions?
What's the walk through to City Hall?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
I have a number of questions. When you mentioned early on that you were you had to deal with a walkthrough basically from Main Street to City Hall to Duke of Gloucester. Will the current walk that skirts the edge of the current building be maintained, or are you thinking of something else?
It will be maintained, yes. And so you'll be able to walk through and around the structure in a very similar way to what you do today.
Okay. I'm very concerned about the lighting and how that's handled. And I think that the lighting and the facade materials really go together. Not the brick facade, but the metal facade, the open areas. And as you said, you're under some responsibility that 50 to 60% of the building has to be open, I assume for ventilation.
Correct.
I'm very concerned about lighting and about how that's handled, because these garages can become, with high beam, LED lights, they can become really kind of obnoxious. And and through a combination of, I don't know, of different kinds of lighting in the ceilings and some kind of screen facades that are more than just those metal pillars, or not pillars, but you know what I mean, those metal posts. Right. Something that really, that visually screens, so that this building doesn't become like a light island, so to speak.
Right. Well, the lighting is incredibly important to me as well. I think our perception of a lot of these structures is based on that. We have to balance that with public safety, obviously, which is also important within the garage. We're looking at the opportunity to have motion detection to turn lights on and off, for instance, so that the lighting is not wasted any more than it need be. I'm rather excited about the idea of the top level of the structure being lit by some smaller string lights, if you will, that I think have a much softer tone to them than harsher, larger LED lights do. And so we're optimistic about that, and we're studying it. It's not easy. It hasn't really been done significantly throughout on public parking garages before, but I think it's a good way to do it. Any way to avoid the tall light standards, I think, would be a positive. And but it is, however, very important to all of us that we obviously have the public safety in mind as well. So we've got to get it right, and we will. But that's where we are. In order to screen the lighting enough that would really make a difference, we would no longer be open. With more than, unfortunately, the light is going to come through. And so the best we can do, and what we will do, is have some of the lighting within the structure, if you will, so that it's above the bottom of the beams, and which allows for a better cutoff of light, and so that you don't see the source of the light any more than necessary.
Well, I agree with you. I would hope that you. I agree. I like your emphasis on lighting and your concern for it. And like you said, this is how these structures are perceived, as either forbidding or as being fairly, knit into the community. And instead of maybe just those posts, even if there were things that were more like veins or like a vertical sail shape that could cut off some of the light and still allow for ventilation, there may be some options. But anyway, yeah. I'm very concerned about lighting and its effect, not only on the neighbors, but as you said, from views from elsewhere in the city.
Right.
On Gorman Street, it looks to me like, first of all, you removed the parking on one side. Is that correct?
No. We've tightened Gorman. We're going to make Gorman approximately 15 feet wide. And we're moving the structure away from Gorman a little bit so that we get that larger sidewalk, which will be about 10 feet wide, including the planter in the middle.
So
I think I'm right. It's even my team members.
Bryce, I think he's talking about the parallel spots, the drop-off
Yeah.
spots, which we would move into the garage. We dedicate spaces for those
For
inside.
deliveries and so forth on the first floor
Oh.
there. Yeah.
Okay, I beg your pardon.
That's
Yes.
a very good idea.
Yeah.
So Gorman is, you're narrowing, you're getting rid of parking and you're narrowing Gorman and you're expanding the sidewalk. Is that correct? On the garage side?
Correct.
I'm concerned about trees in that situation and how they're planted, and I can only suggest that you use those under pavement trees that allow, tree roots to interpenetrate. The name of the boxes.
Silva cells.
Yes.
Yeah, those are currently assumed and something that we're naturally very focused on to be able to maintain proper planting and vegetation along Gorman.
Right. Great, because that's a tough spot for any kind of landscaping, and if it dies, it's going to look really bad. And then finally, how many of these spaces on Gorman Street are you considering?
Well,
or not? You're looking at it just in terms of linear and feet and depth?
How many spaces would be removed on Gorman Street?
No, I'm thinking about who's going to control those spaces? Like, what are they going to be used for 90% of the time? What do you really imagine them to be? Are they flexible spaces where sometimes there's parking and other times you remove the parking and put in some kind of activity? I mean, I don't get those spaces
within the building, within the structure,
because of your trees.
Yeah, within the building, those will be parking spaces that, for specific events or in cooperation with the city, can be converted into temporary spaces for, as Bryce mentioned, art galleries or pop-up stores and things of that nature. They're not intended to be permanently or converted into shops or anything equivalent. It is a shorter time periods due to the nature of how parking demand in the city. There is the opportunity to utilize those spaces when for other purposes when there's less demand for parking. So it's something that we've looked at as a way in which can kind of help further activate Gorman Street. If you have parking capacity that isn't being utilized in the garage, we can take the step of kind of design for this feature.
And what's there when they're not being used for a retail, commercial, artistic?
Parking spaces as shown, or as was shown, they will be striped parking spaces there, and then which then can be. The facade is open with bollards between the sidewalk and the interior parking space.
So if you're walking along the street, what you're going to be looking into is the parking garage?
That's correct.
I don't think that's very lively for most of the time. Most of the time they're not going to be used for these purposes. And parking garages are dead. And I applaud the idea of trying to use the ground floor sidewalk levels of parking garages for something lively. But it sounds to me like I'm walking down the street, I look to my right, and all I do is look into the parking garage through a metal screen. Is that right?
Yeah, I understand the comment. I do, and we've given this a lot of thought, and we'll be continuing to develop it. But the idea of the porousness and some of that transparency, I think, is a good thing. The streetscape, it's all about the streetscape. A nice sidewalk, the planter, the tree. Imagine some nice building lights that will be shining down, some signage elements. The bollards themselves, those are all kind of site accessories that I think are part of the accoutrement of this whole kind of streetscape environment. So I think after thinking about it, the option is a solid wall, and we need to keep the garage open to some extent as well. But most garages really are relatively open. Some of them have a low wall, and that low wall doesn't do but so much to screen your view of it. It simply means you can't easily walk through. So, I mean, that's the conversation.
Something decorative needs to be there when those spaces are not being used. Something decorative. I'm not quite sure. Something expensive, no doubt.
Could it be something like, a garage door sort of thing that comes down that has some artistic element to it?
Yeah, it has to be removable. It has to be movable.
Yeah, but you could raise it up. You could raise it up when they're not cars parking there, and you want to use it, for these other purposes. So, something like that. I mean, obviously it adds more cost, but there's lots of stuff you could do.
So that's a caution. The night is hours getting late. My last comment is you're shrinking Gorman Street from what? From 18 to 15, 16 to 15?
Approximately, and Mark or Drew may be able to give me a better dimension on that, or Ivan.
It's currently 20 feet wide. I think we're proposing 16 feet.
That's a really sharp corner down there at Jimmy John's at the entrance to the garage.
Yep. We will be doing other modifications to allow for turning of fire trucks and delivery vehicles.
Okay. And there needs to be.
We've actually done.
There needs to be some thought as to the pedestrian crossing over the garage entrance and then walking over to Main Street. There needs to be. We need to look at that. So that I'm walking down the street and I'm gonna want to cut diagonally across that little intersection and walk down the little narrow sidewalk to Main Street, either on the Jimmy John side or the other side. But that crossing that little intersection, it needs to be looked at so that it's safe. I'm not quite sure how you do it. Think about it. But those are the thoughts that come to me. And while I applaud the efforts to liven up Gorman Street, we need to make sure that that the trees stay alive, the shrubbery stay alive, and that there's live action. All right, thanks. And it looks a whole lot better than what we have now. It's well thought through, and we're getting there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Landscape pots is going to be one way. I think we can add to Gorman also, and I'm sure Mark will probably have some ideas for us.
Well, whatever requires no maintenance. Because maintenance you ain't gonna get. All right.
Mr. Chair, can I go next?
Yeah, please.
So I won't make any more comments about design. I know you had comments up to your eyeballs, both from us and the Historic Preservation Commission. So I won't add any more to that. But I noted at the beginning of the presentation that Eileen kind of baited me, I think, with some of the background about the due diligence on the business model. And so, I've been sitting here waiting for the last slide to tell me more about that. Now I feel a little burned because I got baited and I didn't see anything. And I know the time is late, but and I'm anticipating that she put that in there for my benefit, if I could be so bold as to say that. But I'm still very interested in understanding, where you think the business model is going to work out on this. Looking back by the comment, revenue from was going to be this stock, which to me sort of is a little counterintuitive, because my speculation has always been that revenue from the garage is going to be hard enough to pay for the garage. But I hope I'm wrong, and you don't have to go into any detail tonight, but I still want to see that eventually.
Alex, if I could, yes, it was put in partly with you in mind, but the city manager, I had hoped, would be able to address that in more detail. And he was not able to join us at the last minute. With that said, we're giving a briefing to the council. in closed session the end of this month. And after that briefing, then we will figure out a way to get him back to meet with the planning commission to, to go over the details about the business model.
Okay, and just to plant one last seed that I think the council will be really interested in. The road, far down the road, not down, but 5 years down the road, if things don't meet expectations, essentially who's holding the bag is I think the kind of thing the council will be interested in. Thanks. Not to be a geographically appropriate comment, a niggling nabob of negativity about that, but that's what keeps me up at night.
I can say that with all the work they've done, the project comes out as being very feasible. So that's the good news. And then with that said, we will bring the city manager back to get into this in more detail with you.
I had some quick items. On the roof, I'm supposing the solar panels and covering wasn't extended to the end because of the look, and people didn't want to see that as part of a view line from the street. My other comment is the windows to make the building look more like the local surrounding community. Is there any other type of windows that could actually make it look more like the surrounding community? Because it looks kind of corporate, like a corporate building. The brick color looks good, but the windows themselves just aren't quite it. Those are two items I'd like to address.
Okay, yeah, I don't have a quick answer for you at all, but that duly noted. We will certainly think about that. I think to put glass in the windows, unfortunately, also defeats the purpose. Keeps the garage open to the extent that we don't have to mechanically ventilate it. And those things kind of notoriously seem to collect dust and dirt too. It seems like in garages where I've seen it done. But I would like to think about that some more.
Yeah, if there was anything that could make it look more like the surrounding buildings, maybe not the same size of opening you currently have, smalling it up. But what about the roof and the solar panel structure extension to even further than it is? What's your argument with that?
I think we're somewhat sensitive to the views from the public way, but it would probably be more, even more efficient, perhaps. And Ivan may want to address that. The more the better, probably from a business perspective.
What about cleaning? Do you need to have that area around it to actually clean the panels? Is that it? Because I looked and maybe you need to get a boom truck up there to clean them. I don't know.
No, that's generally not that big of a deal, and there's ways to do that with specialty equipment from down low if you really have to. Now, the main reason it's pulled back is, as Bryce mentioned, due to aesthetic, and your assumption due to aesthetic reasons, to kind of balance fitting a PV array in this area. There is naturally some sensitivity to certain views, which is totally understandable from a pure production standpoint. The larger the array, the better. So from a city energy policy standpoint, or probably will want the largest PV array possible, but that has to be balanced up against the views.
And one thing I might add also just about that is I think there are some opportunities possibly to have a gathering spot on top of that roof, and having it open above a portion of it would actually be attractive for that purpose. And that's something we're still studying, but I think it could be interesting in that regard, especially with these string lights.
You mean like the city renting out part of that roof for a rooftop gathering? I mean, that'd be fantastic. What about the neighbors' opinion on that?
That's the next topic to discuss. Yeah.
I would personally love to have a party up there myself, but okay, on to something more fruitful. The last thing is, could you just say one more time for me the difference in parking spaces, old design to new design?
The old design is 425, new design is 590. We're currently a little bit north of 590, but that will fluctuate with a detailed design, a couple of spots up and down.
And parking space dimensions versus old versus new? Width.
I believe we're approximately the same. You know, it's interesting. Cars get smaller and then they get bigger at the same time. So they're 9 foot wide by 18 feet deep. Mike Albers might want to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure which is approximately the same as the existing garage.
Bryce, this is Mike. I would have to look at the plans. They're at least 8'6", which is city code. And I don't have the plans in front of me to verify that right now.
And you know, the most popular cars sold out there are Ford F-150, it seems, and bigger SUVs. So, you know, trying to park those in there, that's a lot of the people that come to downtown Annapolis. I mean, it is what it is. But just accommodating that, I guess you guys are designing towards that, I'm assuming. And you get a significant amount of parking spaces increase, which is huge. And also digital. I believe it's going to be digitally controlled like BWI airports. You know how many spaces are available and where to go for what level?
The parking technology we're planning on using is going to be a gateless system, so there won't be any gates entering or exiting the facility. You'll be able to pull in, find a spot, jump out, and then pay on your phone or kiosk on the way in. To what extent there'll be need for wayfinding within the garage when it comes to current ongoing count, just an indication of available spaces, or if that's not needed at all, is some of the detailed operational design considerations that we're going to be getting into here over the next couple of months.
Okay, thanks. We've answered all my questions. The big takeaway from me, my stumbling block is, can we make it look even more so like the surrounding area on those little viewpoints that we have, those view sheds from the street? So, but overall, nice job, great improvement over the previous design, and well done so far, gentlemen and ladies. Anyone else from the commission?
No, I'm good. I agree with you. The more you can do to make it look better, the better.
And I agree, it looks much better than the last version, and yeah, keep refining.
All right, thank you, everyone. When's the next time we can expect to see you on this?
I've got to talk to the team, but I would assume sometime later September, mid to late September.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Fogarty. And I say that in endearing terms because you're here so often. I'd like to have you. Okay, that's the last I got on this item. Anyone else? All right, thanks again, everyone, for your patience. We really appreciate that, and excellent work by staff and the city to come to something on this. Wow, a lot of work. Okay, so work session is now going to close, and we're going to reconvene our Planning Commission meeting for tonight. So thank you, everyone, for the work session. We're now reconvening and going back in and calling to order the Planning Commission's meeting for tonight. And a quick roll call from the commissioners to make sure we still have everyone.
Just a point of order. Do we have to vote to go into a new thing at this late at night?
We already voted as part of agenda amendment earlier to do that.
I didn't know we voted. Okay.
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
You voted, Dave. Okay, and we'll make it rapid. I understand but it's of extreme item for Diane. She may not be able to be around anymore if we don't do this, evidently. So, okay, we are going back into the session. I'm calling it to order, and a quick roll call. Myself, I'm here. Mr. Iams, you're here. Mr. Waldman,
here.
Mr. Pline, Ms. Butler,
here.
Present.
Okay, we have the full quorum. We are here, and we're proceeding on. Now we're going to get back to the item at hand, which is the draft rules of procedure. Public hearing was continued from June 17th. Diane, you said if we didn't hear this tonight, you would not be able to be a commissioner anymore. Could you expand upon that?
Not too much, other than then it's very likely I won't be able to vote on things.
Forevermore, or just for the next meeting?
Well, it all depends on what's on the agenda, but I just anticipate the continued, shall we say, attempts to, how shall we say, not have my voice be heard. So I'm just trying to make sure that that's not the case. And you know, if it's the case that no one, that's all, you know what, that's probably all I can say right now.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the draft rules of procedure from our last meeting. Give me a second here. And it shows the draft that we had proposed. We might actually want to add on to that. So here's the, excuse me. Got to go all the way to the end. Quite a few items open. Okay. Good grief. Here it is. This is what was proposed at our last meeting with regards to the draft Planning Commission rules procedure change. Adding everything you see in black bolded right here. We had the public time for public comment has been opened. It is reopened now, and there is no further comment from the public that we've received. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sally, or city staff.
No, we have not got no comments.
Okay, there's been no comments. Now, with respect to the public comments then, and there's no one, is there also no one on the line to chat about this real time? Correct?
No one has signed up for live testimony.
Okay, well then we can close the public hearing on this and go into deliberations by the commissioner. So the public hearing is closed on this item, and now we're deliberating. We have what we have. We have talked about this in the past and thought it was a good addition. Even the legal department, I believe, was very positive with respect to this. Now, it also sounds like we might want to add on to this based on what's happened today. Is there any comment with respect to that from any of the commissioners and or legal? And I'd like legal to first go if they can. If they can't, that's fine. Chris?
Sure. I think it below what you see on your screen is 6.5, because everything above it addresses applications and such. But what happened tonight appears to be covered by 6.5, if it at all applies. No member shall vote on a matter in which he or she has a personal financial interest or other conflict of interest or ethical concern. So what I was suggesting is a case where there might be needed a ruling of the chair just under parliamentary rules. The chair makes a ruling if such a concern is raised by a member. And if the ruling of the chair is challenged, a member can make such a motion. It can be seconded and discussed and voted on. So there is a remedy under 6.7 under the parliamentary rules to go forward with what you've got so far tonight, knowing that you can rely on parliamentary rules. What I was suggesting is 6.7 could be amended to articulate the same thing that you have for a challenge and a vote as you did the standard language, which is in 6.2A, which says a majority of the commission may override a decision of the commission member not to recuse him or herself and state for the record the reasons for doing so. That's already in parliamentary rules. So if you want, you have two options. You can vote on this package tonight because it has language consistent with other boards and other bodies, or you can take your time and add to this if you want to put it in writing, what happens if a member challenges a concern that's raised, and you want that procedure laid out in the rules themselves. I do think you can go either way, and I leave it to you whether you want to just vote and get this vote over with, or whether you want further discussion of this and another provision to be or two to be added to it, which might add more time for the vote on the rules.
Okay, might as well get it right. But first things first, you pointed to 6.5. And that references receives an unsolicited communication about a pending application or other matter outside the planning commission. Now, it seems that as though something has been received by someone on this meeting, but yet I've yet to been presented with it. So I can't.
Well, I think that, Ben, I think that he misspoke. I think he meant 6.7.
Well, the way mine reads, yeah, I do mean 6.7. I'm looking at an older version. It is 6.7, Mr. Chair. So I'm referring to 6.7.
Not 6.5 at all. There was not a matter received unsolicited tonight. Okay.
No.
All right. Well, okay. In that case, pretty obvious is 6.7. No member shall vote on a matter which he or she has personal financial interest or other conflict of interest or ethical concern. That could be very broad based. We talked about earlier tonight. I mean, where do you draw the line with personal financial interest? Because I live in an R1 and could then have short-term rentals or ADU legislation. I think that's kind of what Diane was getting to earlier. So Diane, do you have any concern with respect to 6.7 and it's changing or staying as it is?
No, well, I mean, I think that, Ben, what you're saying makes exactly my point about, how are we going to be fair about this? If you live in the city, right, and we're talking about legislation going forward on any issue, whether it's, just anything that impacts a zone in which you live, somebody can say, oh, well, Ben lives in one of those zones and that zone is impacted by this legislation, therefore he can't comment. And, in the case of this task force legislation, yeah, I have a rental unit in WME. Actually, if I got to look at the map correctly, have one in another area that might be applicable. But in neither case is the legislation they're talking about going to impact my rental unit. And so I just think we have to be cognizant that if they carry to this logical conclusion, or that you have any interest at all that might be impacted, I will never be able to vote on anything, because I do care about the environment. I do care about people. I do care about zones. I care about zoning. So I'm not exactly sure where to draw the line, but I do feel like right now I'm going to be knocked out of every vote by somebody.
And I get
I
it,
think
there's a point to this where I've heard in past with legal that what's reasonable and what would be reasonable financial interest or reasonable ethical concern. And there's a bit of a gray area that we should have and leave it up to. Now, if you disclose exactly where those properties are at addresses, we can look at that and see if there is any reason that that's reasonable or not. I'll be honest with you. But it seems
that's not a bad idea, right? I mean, because none of them are boatyards, none of them are boatyards with, restaurants pending or anything. So maybe that's a good way to do it. But how do we?
I think 6.7 is just overly broad, and it needs some rails on it to with some language. It's like similar to what was added up above, is that to make it reasonable. I don't know, I'm not a lawyer or a wordsmith, so I'm not the right person to do this, but there needs to be some sort of rails put on there so people can't make a claim that you have an interest that you don't really.
Yeah. So
wait a minute, but isn't this covered by 6.2? Can you scroll up a bit?
6.2?
Yeah, scroll up a bit. 6.2, let's see. Okay, if you've got a conflict, or somebody else thinks you have a conflict, or an applicant thinks you have a conflict, here's the process. It seems to me that if you got rid of 6.7, You've got enough right here in 6.2. Although it's numbered funny, it's 6.2F, 6.2G. That's not numbered right. But you see, you know what I mean? This here, it's very clear. You shall note on the record you have if you got a conflict, and if and you can be overridden by a majority of the commission if they feel like no. You know, it's not your. It's too. You know.
I think if we're going to get rid of 6.7, we
Yeah.
might have to make a change to 6.2 A or whatever, where if the applicant, because that's very specific to an application. I think we're talking about something more general. It's any matter in front of the commission, of which an application is one. So that I think that if we do what you suggest there, Bob, we have to wordsmith that first paragraph a little bit.
Why?
Just to make it more.
Planning Commission wrote down in the record before any proceeding before the commission.
No, I'm talking about the next section down. If an applicant, blah blah blah.
If an applicant.
Because because the rules about affirm something can make a fair blah blah blah, that's with respect to an application. I think that whole paragraph needs to be a little bit more general. That's all I'm saying.
So
Which
basically,
paragraph?
Diane said in this thing that she didn't feel that she felt she could make an impartial decision, basically, and then we could override her if a majority of us overrid her, which we didn't do.
Right.
So I don't see what the issue is, why she would need to step down. For example, if I live near the Giant down in Bay Ridge, does that mean if anything goes down in that area, I can't vote on it? Because it could affect me by being close to it. It might affect my property values down the line somewhere.
Right. That's the
really a
problem.
stretch. And I just think that's really overly broad for us to just say, just because they live near it, it might affect their property values. That's kind of ridiculous.
Does the words conflict of interest cover financial conflict of interest as well? And if so, we could get rid of 6.7. And the whole reason we made this new 6.2 part is to expand upon 6.7. I mean, I know it's hard. We got to think back 3-4 months ago when we started this, but that's the reasoning. So I want legal to tell me, can we get rid of 6.7 because it's covered appropriately in 6.2? And that's the reason we made this.
I think you can. But 6.2 initiates with the planning commissioner noting on the record, or as soon as that person realizes a conflict, whereas in the 6.7 makes a general rule, there won't be a conflict. So if you're satisfied with the way it's worded, you can delete 6.7. I think the problem may come up when a member of the public doesn't step forward and some conflict is raised, the potential conflict, and it's not covered by 6.2 because it's not raised by the member of the commission. Diane, you'll have to speak to it, whether you're satisfied in this situation with deleting 6.7.
Well, I have a suggestion. The 6.7 enunciates a very general policy. And I think that it should become 6.2A.
Like you put it in preface to 6.2 and executing 6.7.
Right. It states the general policy. You can't have financial conflicts of interest.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right. And so you make that 6.2A, and then you can go down 6.2B, C, and D. And if you want to say something about anybody can raise it, I don't know that that's necessary.
It makes sense. That's one way to approach it.
I like that as well. And that's pretty simple to do. Taking 6.7, making it A, and then you go through, shall note on the record for the proceeding. Read through it. Let me go scroll down and let you think about it, everybody, real quick. Read 6.7, and then we'll go back up to 6.2 as if it was moved. Okay. Now, if that was A, do you feel it flows appropriately?
Well, the only thing is it doesn't quite agree with itself when somebody says a conflict of interest or an appearance of conflict of interest. You might want to keep it the same, just to keep it consistent.
Okay, you mean add that to the general policy statement?
Or
The
what if we
appearance-
put the word possible before a conflict, a possible conflict of interest?
Yeah.
Well, no, that's way open, way open-ended. But I think what David is saying is that the appearance of a conflict of interest, which is important. You know, if it looks like you have a conflict of interest, can be discussed and it may be determined that there really is no conflict, or you can be determined that, yeah, it's more than just an appearance or it really looks bad.
I was just
So,
trying to keep it consistent.
so you would add that language to 6.7, the appearance language to 6.7. David? Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
I just wanted to make it consistent. That's all I'm
I
saying.
think you're right.
And maybe it'll end up being redundant if we do that, but
No,
Yeah,
I think you're right.
I think
you're
there's I want to chime in that I think there's sometimes, if you have some redundancy, that adds confusion. I'm almost in favor of deleting 6.7 and just keeping the other language, which really clarifies it. Because if
does.
something is duplicitous, that creates ambiguity, and then that's a mess.
Duplicative.
Duplicative, that's what I meant. Thank you. It's late.
You lawyers, you may always make that same mistake. Anyway.
No.
well, ethical concern is basically saying could be, I don't know.
Well, I tell you, do we need to vote on this tonight?
Well, it would be helpful. I just feel like no matter what's on the agenda next time, someone's gonna try to kick me out of this
No,
discussion.
stop it. Nobody's gonna, you didn't get
Well,
kicked out tonight.
It's sort of becoming a thing.
No, you're being very cautious about it, so that's okay. What I
Not
was
like you're
gonna-
hiding it, you know?
What I was gonna suggest is that I simply do some typing and give it to you in both ways, so that everybody can kind of look at it and get a feeling for it. And then we can vote on it, okay?
I think that's a good way to go. Solidify it up
It'll be easy to do. Okay?
for the next meeting. And if we could, as soon as you get that, let's also post that and make it known to the public.
Okay. Send a copy to Jackie.
That's
So you
right.
want to post both alternatives?
Yeah, I'll send you a little memo,
Okay.
Jackie.
Okay,
Why
that's
not?
fine.
All
And,
right, all right.
okay.
Who's got this document in Word? Who's got it? Ben, do you have it or is it?
I do.
All right.
I do. Jackie does. We all do.
Send it to me.
Okay.
All right, email. Ben will email. All right. I'll take care of that and get that done. And I'll also try to get some work done on the zoning stuff and clarify my diffuse thinking.
Can we, Ben, so for the next meeting, Sally just sent us an email that Eileen cannot be at the August 5th meeting. And so Sally is wondering if we could continue the public testimony on the maritime zones at the next meeting, but then wait until August 19th to do the deliberations on that. And I'm bringing that up only in the context of making sure that all of you are planning on being at both meetings on the 5th and the 19th. Is anybody not planning on attending both of those meetings?
I'm planning on attending both of them. And do we have to have Sally for that next meeting?
Eileen.
Required? I mean, come on.
Well, we don't know. Yeah, if we're going to continue the public testimony and, Sally would probably want to be at that next meeting. It's just a matter of Eileen has requested that you not do the deliberations until the 19th, which is the next meeting when she can attend.
I actually have a family health thing on the 19th. I won't be able to attend.
Okay, all right, so we need to, okay, well, that's problematic because.
Deliberations in the September meeting. I think that would be a.
Yeah, so is anybody not planning on attending the September meeting?
What are the dates?
I don't know it's the day after Labor Day. It's
Hold
The
on.
Thursday.
7th, I think. David, because we're going to need the 4 of you that participated tonight in the maritime zones.
It's the 9th of September. I can be there.
Is it 9th?
Yeah.
No, it won't be the 9th.
It's not a
It'll be
Thursday?
Oh, it's the
second
first
and the
Thursday. I'm
16th.
sorry.
The
I'm
second,
sorry.
the second and the 16th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now listen.
Second, okay.
I can make the 16th, but I'm getting out of here by about 10 o'clock because I got to make an 8 a.m. flight the next morning, okay?
Okay,
Deal?
what about September 2nd?
I'm fine.
I'm fine.
Okay.
Wait a minute, 4
David, are
p.m.
you okay
Van
for
Gogh.
the 2nd?
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah,
Alex
I'm fine with both September dates.
and Ben?
We're good. Sure.
Okay. Okay,
Go for it.
you know, I've got it on the record now that you all are going to be here on September 2nd.
The record's
Really?
not worth a darn.
Bingo.
I've got tickets to the Van Gogh immersion.
Oh, you do? Wow.
I do, 4 p.m. And you
Don't
know,
get any
I'm not gonna
ideas
get
of
out
chopping
those
your ears
seats.
or fingers off.
I have to interject something, Robert.
Yes.
The rules that you're looking at on the screen that the public was looking at with the disjointed numbering system or lettering is not the one that was posted. The one that's posted is correct. So I can send you the properly numbered and lettered version that is posted on the city's website if you need a Word version.
Yeah, send it to me.
I
All
will
right,
do that.
send it to me.
It's the same wording, just the letters are different, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. It's just the lettering F and G. Correct.
Very good.
So
I have that in Word. I'll send it to Bob. You all should have that, but I can send that to you tomorrow, Bob.
okay, I'll get it in two directions, from two directions. That's fine.
Then you'll have two different copies of it. Okay, so we're
Okay.
going to continue the public hearing testimony
August
on the
19th.
maritime
What
zones on
happens?
August 5th. And then we're going to hold the deliberations till September 2nd, correct?
Sounds great.
Okay, we
Perfect.
just need to verify that Eileen will be available then, or we'll have to figure out another game plan.
Well, I may not be.
On September 2nd?
Yeah, you're really pushing this far out on me. I mean, I've made every meeting forever.
I know that, Bob. The problem is until we get more commissioners, till we get the two vacancies.
We understand that. We
Yeah.
understand that.
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll figure
Okay.
something out.
We'll shoot for it and we'll finalize more of this on the sidelines for who can make what if there's a problem. So let's come up with a rough
Okay,
draft.
thank you, Ben.
Eileen Fogarty is the one holding the whole thing up.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, not
Okay.
really. Somewhat. I mean, come on.
Somewhat. Okay, good.
All right,
Ladies and
that's all I
gentlemen, good
have.
evening.
That's all I have on this issue. It's quite
Thank
late.
you.
Everyone, thank you very much. You're all
I'm
champs.
done.
And I make a motion that
move.
we,
Second.
and it's moved. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Okay, there's
No,
none.
let's
It's
keep
all-
going. Come on.
All right, thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned. Please take us all for you.